Death came for Ethan Callahan on a scorching June afternoon in 1876, not with a bullet or a blade, but with fangs dripping venom. The Wyoming prairie stretched empty for miles, his 4 babies crying inside the cabin, and the rattlesnake's poison burning through his veins like liquid fire. He was a dead man, until she appeared on the horizon, a stranger with nothing but a loaf of bread and hands that refused to let him die. Stay with me until the end of this story, and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far this tale has traveled. The sun hung merciless over the Wyoming territory that June morning, bleaching the prairie grass to the color of old bones. Ethan Callahan stood on the sagging porch of his cabin, squinting against the glare, watching dust devils dance across land that seemed to stretch into eternity. Behind him, through the open door, came the symphony of chaos that had become his life. 3-year-old twins Matthew and Michael shrieking over a wooden horse, 2-year-old Sarah banging a spoon against a tin pot with the determination of a blacksmith, and 6-month-old Benjamin wailing from his cradle with the lung capacity of a temperance preacher. 1 year. It had been exactly 1 year since Rebecca died. Ethan's jaw tightened as he gripped the porch railing, the wood rough under his calloused palms. The memories still came at him like ambushes. Rebecca laughing as she hung laundry, her dark hair escaping its pins in the wind. Rebecca humming hymns while she kneaded bread, flour dusting her cheeks. Rebecca in their bed, pale as winter snow, hemorrhaging her life away after Benjamin's birth, while the nearest doctor was 40 miles distant, and the midwife could only weep and pray. "Papa, Papa! Michael took my horse!" Matthew's voice pierced through Ethan's reverie. "Did not! It's mine!" "Boys," Ethan called without turning, his voice carrying the weariness of 1,000 such disputes. "Share it, or I'll throw the damn thing in the fire." The fighting continued unabated. Inside, Benjamin's cries escalated to a fevered pitch. Ethan closed his eyes and drew a breath that felt like inhaling sand. 28 years old, and he felt ancient. His hands, once steady enough to roll a cigarette in a gale, now trembled from exhaustion. His clothes hung loose on a frame that had shed 20 pounds since Rebecca's death. Sleep came in snatches between feedings and nightmares. Food tasted like ash. The ranch, what had once been their dream, 40 acres of possibility, was falling to ruin around him. Fences sagged. Livestock wandered. The vegetable garden Rebecca had tended with such pride was now a graveyard of withered plants. Every day was a battle just to keep the children fed, cleaned, and alive. Every night he collapsed into bed, certain he couldn't face another dawn. "Papa, Sarah's eating dirt again." Ethan turned to find Matthew standing in the doorway, his face a perfect mirror of Rebecca's. Same dark eyes, same stubborn chin, same expression of long-suffering patience with his less intelligent elders. "Christ," Ethan muttered, striding inside. The cabin was a disaster. Tin cups scattered across the floor, yesterday's dishes still piled in the wash basin, diapers hanging from every available surface like surrender flags. Sarah sat in the middle of it all, her dress black with grime, both fists crammed with dirt she was industriously transferring to her mouth. "No, no, baby girl." Ethan scooped her up, prying open her fists and wiping the mud from her lips. She howled in protest, arching her back with impressive strength. I know, everything's terrible and Papa's mean." Benjamin's cries reached a new octave. Michael and Matthew had resumed their battle over the wooden horse, now engaged in a tug-of-war that would inevitably end in tears and splinters. The cabin smelled of sour milk, dirty diapers, and defeat. Ethan settled Sarah on his hip and reached for Benjamin with his free arm, the baby's face purple with rage. The moment he lifted him, he understood. Benjamin's diaper was soaked through, probably had been for hours, and his tiny face was flushed with diaper rash. Guilt twisted in Ethan's gut like a knife. "Matthew, Michael, stop fighting this instant or so. Help me." His voice cracked. The twins froze, eyes wide. They'd never heard their father's voice break before. Ethan stood there in the middle of the disaster, a filthy toddler on one hip, a screaming infant on the other arm, twin boys staring at him with something like fear, and felt the crushing weight of his own inadequacy. He was failing. Every day, in every way, he was failing these children, failing Rebecca. "I'm sorry," he whispered, though whether to the children or his dead wife, he couldn't say. "I'm so damn sorry." He spent the next 2 hours in a frenzy of basic survival, changing Benjamin's diaper, applying lard to his raw skin, scrubbing Sarah in the wash basin while she screamed bloody murder, forcing the twins to eat the burned porridge left over from breakfast, wiping noses, breaking up fights, searching for Michael's missing shoe, wondering how in God's name other people managed to raise children without losing their minds. By noon, he'd achieved a fragile peace. Benjamin nursed himself to sleep on a bottle of goat's milk. They'd lost their only cow last month when she broke her leg in a gopher hole. Sarah napped fitfully on a pile of blankets. The twins played outside under strict orders not to leave the yard. Ethan stood at the stove, trying to figure out what to feed them all for supper. The larder was nearly bare, some beans, a heel of stale bread, a precious few potatoes sprouting eyes. Tomorrow he'd have to ride into Prosperity, the nearest town, and beg more credit from the general store. The thought made him want to lie down and never get up. Through the window, he watched Matthew chase a butterfly while Michael dug in the dirt with a stick. Normal children doing normal things. But for how long? Winter would come, as it always did in Wyoming, brutal and unforgiving. How would he keep 4 babies warm and fed through months of blizzards and isolation? How would he manage when Benjamin started crawling, when Sarah learned to climb, when the twins discovered matches or knives or any of the 1,000 ways children found to kill themselves on the frontier? Other men remarried quickly after losing a wife. It was practical, even expected. But Ethan couldn't imagine it. The thought of another woman in Rebecca's kitchen, sleeping in Rebecca's bed, felt like betrayal. Besides, what woman would want to take on 4 babies and a failing ranch? He had nothing to offer but hardship and heartbreak. A faint sound caught his attention. Hoofbeats, approaching from the east. Visitors were rare out here, 10 miles from the nearest neighbor. Ethan's hand instinctively went to the rifle hanging above the door. The frontier had been relatively peaceful since the Indian troubles ended, but outlaws and drifters still roamed the territory, and a lone man with children made an easy target. He stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand but not raised, squinting into the afternoon glare. A single rider approached at an easy trot, leading a pack horse. As the figure drew closer, Ethan relaxed fractionally. It was a woman, dressed in a simple traveling dress and bonnet, sitting her horse with the easy confidence of someone raised around animals. "Matthew, Michael, come here," he called softly. The boys obeyed immediately, sensing the change in their father's demeanor. They clustered behind him on the porch as the rider approached. She drew rein 20 feet from the cabin, her horse, a pretty gray mare, blowing softly from the ride. The woman was young, perhaps 25, with a face more interesting than beautiful, strong-boned and sun-touched, with intelligent gray eyes that took in everything: the sagging porch, the weedy garden, the half-dressed man with 2 children clinging to his legs, and wariness in his eyes. "Mr. Callahan?" Her voice was clear and cultured, Eastern-educated. It had been so long since Ethan had heard a woman speak that he found himself staring. "That's right." He kept his voice neutral, not quite hostile, but far from welcoming. "Can I help you?" "I'm Clara Monroe, the new school teacher in Prosperity." She swung down from her horse with the grace of long practice, reaching into her saddlebag. "I've been making rounds to all the families in the district, introducing myself. I brought this as a greeting." She held up a cloth-wrapped loaf, and even from the porch, Ethan could smell fresh-baked bread. Real bread, not the charred hockey pucks he produced. Something in his chest loosened fractionally at the sight of that bread, at the simple kindness of it. That's mighty neighborly, Miss Monroe. Matthew, take the bread inside. Careful now." Matthew darted forward, accepted the loaf with both hands as if it were made of gold, and scurried back inside. Michael remained pressed against Ethan's leg, thumb in mouth, staring at the stranger with unblinking curiosity. Clara smiled at the boy, but directed her words to Ethan. "Reverend Walsh mentioned you had children who would be of school age in a few years. I wanted to introduce myself early, let you know there's a good school in Prosperity now. The town built a proper schoolhouse last spring." "That's—" Ethan searched for words, found his mind curiously blank. The simple act of conversation with another adult felt strange, like speaking a half-forgotten language. "That's good to know. When they're older. Right now they're—" He gestured vaguely at Michael. Little. I can see that. Clara's eyes crinkled with gentle amusement. How many do you have? 4. The twins, Matthew and Michael, you met Matthew. Sarah's 2, sleeping inside. Benjamin's 6 months. He watched her face for the usual reaction, pity mixed with horror, but saw only thoughtful assessment. 4 children under 4 years old. That's quite a handful. Their mother died, he said flatly, because it needed to be said, because it explained everything. The filthy children, the ruined homestead, the half-wild look he knew was in his own eyes. Year ago. I know. Clara's voice softened. Reverend Walsh told me. I'm very sorry for your loss, Mr. Callahan. The words were simple, free of the performative grief he'd endured from others. Something about her directness made Ethan's throat tighten dangerously. He nodded once, not trusting his voice. An awkward silence stretched between them. Clara's horse stamped and swished its tail at flies. Inside the cabin, Benjamin began to fuss, working up to another cry. Matthew appeared in the doorway, eyes wide. Papa, Sarah's awake and she pulled all the diapers down. Of course she had. Ethan closed his eyes briefly. I'll be right there. I should be going anyway, Clara said quickly, gathering her reins. I have 2 more families to visit before dark. It was nice to meet you, Mr. Callahan. And you, Michael. Michael removed his thumb long enough to whisper, bye, before reinserting it. Clara mounted her horse with easy grace, settling into the saddle. Something made Ethan step off the porch, words tumbling out before he could stop them. Miss Monroe, if you're ever out this way again, if you need to water your horse or rest, you'd be welcome to stop. He couldn't believe he'd said it. He hadn't invited another human being onto his property since Rebecca died. But something about this calm-voiced woman with her loaf of bread had cracked the wall he'd built around himself. Clara smiled, and it transformed her face into something approaching beauty. Thank you, Mr. Callahan. I might take you up on that. The ride from prosperity is long, and my mare appreciates a rest. She touched her heels to the gray's sides and moved off at a trot, her back straight, the pack horse trailing obediently behind. Ethan watched until she disappeared into the heat shimmer, feeling oddly bereft. Then Benjamin's cries crescendoed, and reality crashed back in. The rest of the afternoon passed in the usual blur of small emergencies. Sarah had indeed pulled down all the drying diapers and then peed on the floor. Benjamin refused to be consoled, crying until Ethan walked circles around the cabin with him, bouncing and shushing. The twins squabbled over everything. Who got to sit where? Who had more water in their cup? Whether the clouds looked like horses or sheep. Supper was beans and the precious bread, which the children fell upon like wolves, stuffing their faces with both hands. Bath time was a war zone. Bedtime a negotiation that would have made a Lakota chief proud. By the time Ethan got all 4 children into their beds, the twins sharing one, Sarah in a small cot, Benjamin in his cradle, he was trembling with exhaustion. He stood in the doorway between the main room and the sleeping area, watching their small faces in the lamplight, and felt the love and terror war within him as they did every night. They were so small, so fragile, so utterly dependent on him. One mistake, one moment of inattention, and he could lose them. The frontier was merciless. Children died from snake bites, from fevers, from accidents that happened in seconds. How could he possibly keep them safe? God, he whispered into the darkness, addressing a deity he'd stopped believing in the day Rebecca died. If you're listening, if you give a damn about anything down here, help me, please. I can't do this alone. Only silence answered. Ethan banked the fire, checked that the door was barred, and fell into his own bed without bothering to undress. His last thought before sleep claimed him was of gray eyes and a loaf of bread. He woke to Matthew shaking his shoulder. Papa? Papa? Wake up. Ethan dragged himself up through layers of exhausted sleep, his body protesting. Gray pre-dawn light filtered through the windows. What's wrong? Is someone hurt? Michael wet the bed again. Matthew's voice was matter of fact, as if this were merely another inconvenience in a life full of them. And Benjamin's hungry, and Sarah wants water. Of course. Always something. Ethan forced himself upright, his back screaming in protest. He'd slept awkwardly, half on and half off the mattress. All right, go get Michael cleaned up. His bare foot hit the floor and something shifted beneath it, something that shouldn't be there. Ethan looked down, saw the coil of patterned scales, registered what it meant a half second before the rattlesnake struck. The fangs sank into his left hand, just above the wrist, twin points of fire. Ethan jerked back instinctively, stumbling, and the snake released, its tail buzzing a warning rattle that filled the cabin. Matthew screamed. Michael's wail joined his brother's. Sarah started crying. Benjamin's howls rose to a crescendo. Time slowed to individual heartbeats. Ethan watched, almost dreamlike, as the rattler coiled and slithered away through a gap in the floorboards he'd been meaning to fix for months. His hand was already swelling, the puncture marks weeping blood. Heat radiated up his arm, into his chest, stealing his breath. Rattlesnake, in the house, his children. Terror gave him strength. Ethan lunged forward, grabbed the rifle, and fired twice through the floor where the snake had disappeared. The explosions were deafening in the confined space, and the children's screams reached a pitch that seemed to split the air itself. He didn't care if he'd hit the snake or not. It was gone. That was what mattered. The children were safe. The rifle clattered from his suddenly nerveless fingers. The hand was grotesque now, swollen to twice its normal size, the fingers like sausages, the skin stretched and mottled. Nausea rose in a wave. The room tilted. Matthew. His voice came from far away, distorted. Take your brothers and sister. Go to the Hendersons, 10 miles east. Follow the road. Tell them... The words were getting harder to form. His tongue felt too large for his mouth. Tell them, Snake. Get Doc Miller. Papa? Matthew's face was white, his eyes huge with fear. Papa, what's wrong? Go. Ethan tried to push him toward the door, but his arm wouldn't obey properly. He was falling, the floor rushing up to meet him. Go now. Run! But Matthew was 8 years old and terrified, and his brothers and sister were screaming, and it was too much to ask. Ethan realized this even as consciousness began to fragment. A 7-year-old boy couldn't carry a baby, couldn't manage a toddler and his twin brother across 10 miles of prairie. They would die trying. They would all die. I'm sorry, Rebecca. I tried. God help me, I tried. The venom was coursing through his bloodstream now, heading for his heart. His vision blurred and doubled. Sounds became distorted, stretched like taffy. The children's cries seemed to come from underwater. He was burning up and freezing simultaneously, his muscles seizing in spasms. Through the window, still somehow visible though his eyes barely focused, Ethan saw the sun break over the horizon, painting the prairie gold. Beautiful. Rebecca would have loved this light. She'd always been awake to see the dawn, singing softly to herself as she started the day's work. I'm coming, Rebecca. I'm so sorry. The children... His heart stuttered, forgot its rhythm, found it again in a painful lurch. His lungs wouldn't expand properly. Darkness crept in from the edges of his vision. The last thing he heard before consciousness fled was Matthew's voice, high and terrified and so very young. Papa, Papa, please wake up. Please don't die, Papa. Then nothing. Time passed, minutes or hours. He couldn't tell. He was aware of sound and motion, of hands on his body, of pain that existed beyond words. Voices swirled around him, one cutting through the others with the clarity of a bell. Got him on the table, need to see the bite. Matthew, I need you to be brave and help me. Can you do that? A child's sob. Is he dead? Is my papa dead? No, sweetheart, but we have to work fast. I need clean water. Is there a well? Out back, Matthew's voice steadying with purpose. I'll get it. Ethan tried to speak, to tell them something important he'd forgotten, but his mouth wouldn't work. Someone was cutting his shirt away. Cool air hit his burning skin. Then pain exploded through his left arm, so intense it dragged him partially back to consciousness. A woman's face hovered above his, haloed by lamplight. Gray eyes, he noted distantly. Where had he seen those eyes? She was doing something to his hand, something that hurt worse than the snake bite itself. He tried to pull away, but strong hands held him down. I know it hurts, the woman said, her voice tight with concentration. I have to drain the venom. I know it hurts. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. She was cutting him, He felt the blade slice into the swollen flesh, felt hot blood and poison pour out. His back arched involuntarily. A scream tried to tear itself from his throat, but emerged as only a strangled gasp. "Matthew, the cloth. Good boy. Now the bandages. Yes, those. You're doing wonderfully." More pain, endless pain, as she worked on the wound. Ethan felt consciousness slipping away again and welcomed it, but she wouldn't let him go. Every time he started to drift, her voice called him back. "Mr. Callahan, Ethan, stay with me. Don't you dare leave those children. Stay with me." Why, he wanted to ask. Why fight? Maybe it was better this way. Rebecca was waiting. She'd know what to do with the children. Matthew tells me Sarah's favorite color is yellow. The woman's voice continued, relentless, as her hands worked on his arm. And that Benjamin laughs when you tickle his feet. And that Michael wants to be a horse trainer when he grows up. Matthew wants to be like his papa, a rancher. "Stop," he tried to say. "Please stop." "They need you," she continued, her voice fierce now. "Do you hear me? They need their father. So you fight. You stay here. You stay with them." Something cool and bitter forced its way between his lips. Medicine of some kind. He choked, swallowed reflexively. His stomach revolted, but the woman's hand pressed firm against his chest. "Keep it down. It'll help with the venom. Keep it down." More time passed. The pain gradually receded from unbearable to merely agonizing. The fever still raged, but his heart seemed to have settled into a steadier rhythm. Voices murmured around him, the woman giving instructions, Matthew responding, other children crying. The sounds of life, of family, of survival. Ethan surfaced to consciousness like a drowning man breaking through water. The cabin ceiling came into focus, the familiar smoke-stained wood he'd stared at for countless sleepless nights. But everything was different now, clean, organized, the smell of fresh bread and coffee instead of sour milk and despair. He turned his head carefully, every muscle protesting. The woman, Clara Monroe, his memory supplied, sat in Rebecca's rocking chair with Benjamin in her arms, feeding him a bottle with practiced ease. Sarah slept curled against her side like a kitten. Across the room, the twins played quietly with wooden blocks, building and destroying towers with the focused intensity of young children. Clara looked up and met his eyes. Relief flooded her face. "You're awake. Thank God." "How long?" His voice was a ruined croak. 2 days. She shifted Benjamin to her shoulder, rubbing his back until he burped. "You've been unconscious most of that time. The fever broke this morning." 2 days. He'd lost 2 days. Panic surged. "The children are fine, all of them. I've been here." She said it simply, as if staying for 2 days with a stranger's children was the most natural thing in the world. "Matthew's been wonderful helping. He's a brave boy." Ethan tried to sit up, and the room spun viciously. Clara was there instantly, her hand firm on his shoulder. Slowly, the venom did significant damage. "You'll be weak for several weeks." "Can't be weak." The words came out harsh, frightened. "Have to take care of—" "You'll heal." Her voice was gentle but implacable. "Your body needs time. Rattlesnake venom doesn't forgive impatience." Questions crowded his tongue. How had she been here? Why had she stayed? What about the school? But exhaustion dragged at him, and his eyes closed despite his best efforts to keep them open. "Sleep," Clara murmured. "I'm not going anywhere yet. The children are safe. Sleep." He wanted to argue, to insist he was fine, to take back control of his life, but his body had other ideas, and he slipped back under, this time into dreams that were less dark. When he woke again, true darkness had fallen. A lamp burned low on the table. Someone had covered him with a quilt. Rebecca's wedding quilt, he realized, the one she'd sewn with her mother before they married. He ran his right hand over the familiar pattern, his throat tight. "Papa?" Matthew's whisper came from beside the bed. The boy sat cross-legged on the floor, clearly having appointed himself guardian. "Does it hurt?" "Not too bad." A lie, but necessary. His left arm felt like someone was driving railroad spikes through it, and his head pounded, but children didn't need to know everything. You been taking care of your brothers and sister? Miss Clara's been helping. She's real nice, Papa. She knows how to do everything. She made the bread and she cleaned the house, and she didn't get mad when Michael spilled milk everywhere. Matthew's voice was awed. She even fixed the squeaky door. Ethan absorbed this, uncertain what to feel. Gratitude, certainly. Relief. But also something that might have been guilt or resentment. She'd stepped into his home, taken over his responsibilities, seen his failure made manifest in every corner of the neglected cabin. As if summoned by thought, Clara appeared in the doorway, carrying a basin of water and fresh bandages. She smiled at Matthew. Go check on your sister for me? I thought I heard her stirring. Matthew scrambled up obediently. When he'd gone, Clara settled onto the stool beside the bed, her expression professionally neutral. I need to check the wound and change the dressing. It's going to hurt. I know. He watched her unwrap the bandages, gritting his teeth as the fabric pulled at damaged flesh. The hand was still swollen, but no longer grotesquely so. The angry red mottling faded to purple bruises. The cuts she'd made to drain the venom were clean, stitched with neat precision. You did this? He nodded at the stitches. My father was a doctor in Boston. He insisted I learn basic medicine. Her hands worked with confident efficiency, cleaning the wound with something that burned. Said a woman should be able to take care of herself and others in an emergency. I thought he was being overprotective. Turns out he was right. You saved my life. Perhaps. Clara wrapped fresh bandages, her touch gentle despite the pain it caused. Mostly you saved yourself by having the constitution of an ox. Many men would have died from a bite like that. Silence fell between them, broken only by the quiet sounds of children in the next room. Ethan watched her work, this stranger who'd walked into his disaster and somehow made it bearable. Why did you stay? Clara paused, meeting his eyes directly. Where else would I go? You were dying and 4 children needed care. It's what anyone would do. No, he said quietly. It's not. Most people would have gotten help and left. You've been here 2 days. A faint smile touched her lips. I sent Matthew to the Hendersons the first day. They sent word to town. Doc Miller came out yesterday afternoon, checked you over, said I'd done everything right. Said if I left you and the children alone now, I'd be committing murder by neglect. She finished tying off the bandage and sat back. So, here I am. The school doesn't start for another month. The school board knows where I am. Reverend Walsh came by this morning, brought supplies. Half the town knows you were snake bit. Her expression softened. You're not alone out here, Mr. Callahan, even if it feels that way sometimes. The kindness in her voice nearly undid him. Ethan looked away, blinking hard against the sudden sting of tears. A year of holding everything together, of being strong for his children, of allowing no weakness. It all threatened to crack apart under the weight of simple human compassion. Hey, Clara's hand covered his uninjured one, warm and steady. You're allowed to be scared. You nearly died. That's terrifying. I can't be scared, he said roughly. Can't afford it. The children need a father who's human, who admits when he needs help. She squeezed his hand gently. Strength isn't about never falling down, Mr. Callahan. It's about getting back up, and sometimes it's about letting someone help you stand. He turned back to look at her, really look at her. In the lamplight, her face was all planes and shadows, those gray eyes steady and clear. Not beautiful, perhaps, but striking, strong, real. Why? He asked again, but meaning something different now. Why would you do this for strangers? Clara was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice carried a weight of old pain. Because 5 years ago, when I needed help desperately, a stranger showed kindness to me. It saved my life in ways that had nothing to do with medicine. I swore if I ever got the chance, I'd pass that forward. She smiled, but it was sad around the edges. You and your children gave me that chance. Before he could respond, a crash came from the other room, followed by Michael's wail. Clara sighed and stood. Duty calls. Try to rest. I'll bring you some broth in a bit. You need to eat. She left him alone with his thoughts and the memory of her hand over his. Through the doorway, he could hear her calming Michael, her voice patient and kind. Someone laughed. Matthew, he thought, a sound he hadn't heard in months. His children, alive and safe and even happy, because a woman with a loaf of bread had refused to let them be orphaned. Ethan closed his eyes, and for the first time since Rebecca died, he prayed a prayer of gratitude. The days that followed blurred together in a haze of healing and revelation. Ethan's body mended slowly, grudgingly, as if protesting the very idea of recovery. The fever came and went in waves, leaving him drenched in sweat one moment and shivering the next. His left hand remained swollen and useless, the pain a constant throb that radiated up his arm and into his shoulder. But worse than the physical agony was the forced helplessness, the indignity of needing assistance for the simplest tasks. Clara moved through his home like she'd always belonged there, her presence both comforting and unsettling. She woke before dawn, had coffee brewing and breakfast prepared by the time the children stirred. She changed diapers with efficient grace, settled disputes with calm authority, and somehow managed to transform the chaos of 4 children into something approaching order. The cabin, which had descended into squalor over the past year, began to look like a home again. On the 3rd morning after the bite, Ethan woke to find her scrubbing the floor on her hands and knees, her sleeves rolled up and her hair tied back with a simple ribbon. Benjamin sat nearby in a makeshift pen she'd constructed from chairs, happily gumming a wooden spoon. The twins were outside. He could hear their laughter through the open door. And Sarah sat at the table, carefully stacking tin cups under Clara's watchful supervision. "You don't have to do that," Ethan said from the bed, his voice still rough from sleep. Shame heated his face. A woman on her knees scrubbing his floors because he'd been too broken to maintain basic cleanliness. Clara sat back on her heels, pushing a strand of hair from her forehead with the back of one wet hand. "I know I don't have to, but floors don't clean themselves, and children need a sanitary environment." She resumed scrubbing, her tone matter-of-fact. "Besides, I find physical work meditative. Helps me think." "What are you thinking about?" She paused again, meeting his eyes with that disconcerting directness of hers. "Whether you're strong enough for me to help you outside today. You need sunlight and fresh air. Being cooped up in this cabin is slowing your recovery. I can walk on my own. Can you?" One eyebrow arched in gentle challenge. "You made it 3 steps to the wash basin yesterday before you started to collapse. Matthew had to help you back to bed." The reminder stung, mostly because it was true. Ethan had been determined to prove his independence, to reclaim some measure of dignity, and had nearly ended up face first on the floor for his trouble. Matthew's small hands steadying him, the boy's voice tight with worry. The memory made him want to put his fist through the wall. "I hate this," he said quietly, surprising himself with the admission. "Hate being weak. Hate needing help. Hate that my children are seeing me like this." Clara stood, carrying the bucket of dirty water to the door and tossing it out into the yard. When she returned, she settled onto the stool beside his bed, her expression thoughtful. "You know what they see when they look at you? They see their father, who got hurt protecting them. Who's fighting to get better so he can take care of them again? They see strength, Mr. Callahan, not weakness. They see a man who can't even dress himself without help. They see a man who's healing. There's a difference." She leaned forward slightly, her voice gentle but firm. "My father used to say that true strength isn't about never needing help. It's about having the courage to accept it when it's offered. You think you're teaching them weakness by being vulnerable? You're teaching them that it's okay to be human, that even strong people need support sometimes." Ethan wanted to argue, but found no words that would hold up against her quiet logic. Instead, he looked past her to where Sarah had successfully built a tower of 5 cups and was attempting a 6th, her tongue caught between her teeth in concentration. "She's talking more," he observed. "Sarah, I've heard her say actual words instead of just babbling." A smile lit Clara's face. "She's a bright little thing. Yesterday she told me the cups were pretty and asked for more milk. She just needed someone to really listen to her, to take the time to understand what she was trying to say." The implication hung unspoken between them, that Ethan hadn't been listening, had been too overwhelmed to give his daughter the attention she needed. Another failure to add to the growing list. He closed his eyes, suddenly exhausted despite having done nothing but lie in bed. I'm not criticizing you, Clara said softly, reading his thoughts with uncomfortable accuracy. You've been surviving, Mr. Callahan. Keeping 4 children alive on your own after losing your wife, that's not failure, that's a miracle. But survival isn't the same as living. These children need more than just to be kept alive. They need to be seen, heard, nurtured. You know this. You're just too tired and too hurt to give it to them right now. And you can? He hadn't meant it to sound so harsh, so defensive. If the tone bothered her, Clara didn't show it. For now, yes. Because I'm not carrying a year's worth of grief and exhaustion. Because I haven't been bitten by a rattlesnake. Because I slept more than 2 hours last night. She reached out and adjusted the quilt over his chest with a touch that was purely practical, yet somehow comforting. This isn't permanent, Mr. Callahan. You're going to heal. You're going to get your strength back. And when you do, you're going to be an even better father than you were before. Because you'll have learned that accepting help isn't the same as admitting defeat. Before he could formulate a response, Michael came barreling through the door, his face flushed with excitement. Miss Clara! Miss Clara! There's a rabbit by the garden. Can we catch it? Can we keep it? Clara rose smoothly, her teacher's voice sliding into place. We can certainly try to catch it, but rabbits are wild creatures. They don't do well in captivity. Better to admire it from a distance and let it live its life, don't you think? But I want a pet. I understand that, and perhaps we can talk to your father about getting a dog once he's feeling better. Dogs make wonderful pets, but for now, why don't you show me this rabbit? Maybe we can sketch it in the dirt, and you can tell me everything you notice about it. Michael's disappointment transformed into enthusiasm in the blink of an eye. Really? Can Matthew sketch it too? Of course. Go get your brother. The boy thundered back outside, shouting for his twin. Clara glanced at Ethan, a wry smile playing at her lips. The energy of a 7-year-old boy could power a locomotive. I'll be back to help you outside in a bit. Try not to do anything heroic while I'm gone, please. She was out the door before he could respond, leaving him alone with Sarah and Benjamin. His daughter abandoned her cup tower and toddled over to the bed, her small face serious. Papa hurt? Papa's getting better, baby girl. Ethan managed to extend his good arm, and Sarah climbed up beside him with the fearless confidence of a child who'd never been dropped. She curled against his side, warm and solid, smelling of milk and something sweet. Honey, he realized. Clara must have let her taste honey. Miss Clara Nice, Sarah announced, patting his chest with one sticky hand. Sings pretty. Does she now? Uh-huh. Sings about stars and birdies and... Sarah's face scrunched in concentration. About a man who eats pie. Despite everything, Ethan felt a smile tug at his mouth. That sounds like a good song. Miss Clara says you're a good papa. Sarah looked up at him with Rebecca's eyes, solemn and assessing. She says you love us very much. His throat closed. I do, sweetheart. More than anything in this whole world. Then why you sad all the time? The question, delivered with such innocent directness, hit harder than any accusation could have. Ethan struggled to find an answer that a 2-year-old could understand, that wouldn't burden her with adult grief. Sometimes grown-ups get sad when they miss someone they love. Do you remember Mama? Sarah's face clouded. Mama gone. Yes, Mama's gone, and Papa misses her very much. But that doesn't mean I'm not happy to have you and your brothers. You make me happy, Sarah. All of you do. She seemed to accept this, settling more firmly against his side. Within minutes, her breathing had evened into sleep. Ethan lay there, his daughter warm against him, Benjamin cooing contentedly in his pen, and felt something shift in his chest. The grief was still there. It would always be there, he suspected, but for the first time in a year, it didn't feel like it was crushing the life out of him. True to her word, Claire returned an hour later and insisted on helping him outside. It was a humiliating process, her shoulder under his arm, supporting most of his weight, his legs trembling with the effort of walking 20 feet to the porch. But when he finally settled into the rocking chair that had been Rebecca's favorite spot, the late morning sun warm on his face and a gentle breeze carrying the scent of prairie grass, he had to admit she'd been right. The cabin had begun to feel like a tomb. The twins were indeed sketching in the dirt near the garden, their dark heads bent in concentration. Sarah toddled between them, offering unsolicited advice. Benjamin dozed in a basket at Ethan's feet, his tiny fists curled beside his cheeks. Clara had disappeared back inside, and through the open door he could hear her humming, the same tune Sarah had mentioned, something about stars and birds. "Papa, look!" Matthew came running over, his hands cupped carefully. "I found a caterpillar. It's fuzzy." Ethan dutifully admired the creature, answering Matthew's rapid-fire questions about whether it would become a butterfly or a moth, what it ate, whether they could keep it. The normalcy of it was almost painful. This was what life should be, what it had been before Rebecca died. Father and sons discussing insects in the sunshine. Simple, ordinary, precious. "Put him back where you found him," Ethan finally said. "He's got caterpillar business to attend to." Matthew giggled at the phrase and scampered off. Michael appeared next, wanting to know if they could plant more vegetables in the garden, if Papa would teach him to ride a horse, if they could have pie for supper. The questions were endless, exhausting, and wonderful. Clara emerged from the cabin with a cup of coffee and a plate of bread and butter. "Thought you might be hungry." She settled onto the porch steps, arranging her skirts, and gazed out at the prairie with the contentment of someone who found beauty in empty horizons. "How do you do it?" Ethan asked after he'd managed a few bites of bread. His appetite was still weak, but the food tasted better than anything he'd eaten in months, probably because he hadn't burned it himself. "Do what?" "Handle them. The children. They listen to you. They don't fight as much. Even Benjamin seems calmer." Clara was quiet for a moment, watching the twins chase each other around the garden. Children respond to consistency and calm. They need to know what to expect, what the boundaries are. Most misbehavior comes from uncertainty or from needs not being met. Hunger, tiredness, wanting attention. She glanced at him. "They're good children, Mr. Callahan. A bit wild from lack of structure, but fundamentally good." "They're all I have left of her," he said quietly, not quite sure why he was sharing this. "Every time I look at them, I see Rebecca. Matthew has her eyes. Sarah has her stubborn chin. Michael laughs like she did. And Benjamin," his voice cracked, "Benjamin never even got to know her." "That's the hardest part, isn't it?" Clara's voice was soft. "That he'll grow up with no memory of his mother, that the others will forget her face, her voice, as the years pass. How do I keep her alive for them? How do I make sure they know who she was?" "You tell them stories, you share memories, you show them the things she loved." Clara rose and moved to sit on the porch railing, facing him. "But Mr. Callahan, Ethan, you also have to let yourself heal enough to remember her with joy instead of just pain. Right now, grief is all you have. That's natural, but eventually you'll be able to think of her and smile at the memories instead of feeling like you're drowning. And when you reach that place, you'll be able to give your children a complete picture of their mother, the laughter as well as the loss." "What if I can't get there? What if this is all there is now?" "You will," she said with quiet certainty. "Because you have 4 reasons to keep trying, and they're currently attempting to catch that rabbit despite my very clear explanation about wild animals." Ethan turned to see all 3 mobile children stalking through the tall grass, moving with the focused intensity of miniature hunters. A cottontail sat frozen 20 feet away, clearly aware of the threat, but not yet alarmed enough to bolt. "Should we stop them?" "Let them try. They'll learn that some things can't be caught, no matter how much we want them." Clara's voice held an odd note, something like regret. "That's a valuable lesson." They sat in companionable silence, watching the inevitable conclusion, the rabbit's explosive flight, the children's disappointed cries, Michael's tears, which Clara soothed with promises of drawing pictures instead. The sun climbed higher. Benjamin woke and needed changing. Sarah declared herself hungry. The world kept turning, demanding attention, refusing to accommodate grief or rattlesnake venom or the complicated feelings churning in Ethan's chest. That evening, after Clara had somehow gotten all 4 children fed, bathed and into bed, with a minimum of drama, she found Ethan still sitting on the porch in the gathering dusk. He'd managed to make it back outside on his own, slowly, carefully, but under his own power. Small victories. You should be resting, she said, settling beside him on the steps. Been resting for days, needed to see the stars. It was true. The Wyoming sky was beginning to reveal its full glory, stars emerging like pinpricks in dark velvet. Rebecca loved the stars, used to make up stories about the constellations. What kind of stories? So he told her, haltingly at first, then with growing ease. Stories Rebecca had invented about the Big Dipper being a soup ladle for hungry travelers, about Orion being a cowboy who'd lassoed the moon, about the Milky Way being a trail of spilled stardust left by dancing angels. Clara listened without interrupting, and when he finally fell silent, she didn't offer platitudes or try to ease his pain with empty words. She sounds like she was wonderful, Clara said simply. She was. Best thing that ever happened to me. We met at a barn dance in Missouri, married 3 months later. Everyone said we were too young, too impulsive. Maybe we were. But we had 7 good years before... He couldn't finish the sentence. Before she gave her life bringing Benjamin into the world. Yeah, the word came out rough. Sometimes I look at him and I feel this terrible anger, like it's his fault she's gone. I know that's wrong. I know it's not his fault, but I feel it anyway, and then I hate myself for feeling it. That's normal, Clara said quietly. Grief isn't rational. It doesn't follow rules or make sense. You're allowed to feel angry, even if the anger isn't fair. The important thing is that you don't act on it. Don't let it poison your relationship with Benjamin. And from what I've seen, you don't. You hold him just as gently as the others. You love him just as fiercely. I'm trying. That's all any parent can do. Try their best and hope it's enough. Another silence fell, this one heavier with things unsaid. Finally, Ethan asked the question that had been building for days. How long can you stay? Clara's hand stilled in her lap. I need to be back in Prosperity by the end of next week. School starts the Monday after. I have to prepare the schoolhouse, review my curriculum, meet with parents. 7 days. 7 days and then she'd leave, taking with her the calm and order she'd brought. 7 days and he'd be alone again with 4 children and a body that still couldn't manage basic tasks without trembling with exhaustion. The thought filled him with a panic so intense it nearly stopped his breath. I see, he managed. By then you should be strong enough to manage on your own. Not at full strength, but functional. And I spoke with Mrs. Henderson when she visited yesterday. She's agreed to come by every few days to help with the heavy work, laundry, cooking, that sort of thing. You won't be entirely alone. Charity, pity. The words tasted bitter. But what choice did he have? He couldn't care for his children properly in his current state. And Mrs. Henderson was a kind woman, 60 years old and missing her own grown children. She'd probably welcome the excuse to mother someone again. That's kind of her. And of you, for arranging it. Ethan. Clara turned to face him fully, her expression serious in the starlight. There's no shame in accepting help. None. Do you think pioneers survived out here by being entirely self-sufficient? No. They survived by building communities, by helping each other through hard times. This territory is too harsh for anyone to make it alone. Rebecca and I were doing fine alone. Were you? Or were you just fortunate not to face a crisis you couldn't handle together? Her voice gentled. I'm not trying to diminish what you and your wife built here, but she's gone now, and you're facing something no one should face alone. Single parenthood of 4 small children while recovering from a life-threatening injury. Accepting help doesn't make you weak, it makes you wise. He wanted to argue, to defend his stubborn independence, but exhaustion had stripped away his ability to maintain the pretense. I'm scared, he admitted, the words barely audible. Scared that without you here, it'll all fall apart again. That I'll fail them. You won't fail them. You might struggle. You might have hard days, but you won't fail them. Do you want to know why I'm certain of that? Why? Because you love them enough to be terrified of failing them. Bad parents don't lie awake worrying about whether they're good enough. They don't feel guilty about their shortcomings. They don't ask for help. She reached out and squeezed his shoulder briefly, the touch both comforting and entirely proper. You're a good father having a terrible time. There's a difference. Ethan felt his eyes sting and blinked hard against threatening tears. He would not cry, not in front of this woman who'd already seen him at his weakest. But Clara seemed to sense his struggle and tactfully turned her attention back to the stars, giving him space to regain his composure. "Tell me about teaching," he said eventually, desperate to change the subject. "Why did you come to Wyoming? Boston must have had schools." Clara was quiet for so long he thought she might refuse to answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was distant, colored with old pain. "Boston had schools, yes, but I wasn't fit to teach in them anymore. Not after—" She paused, seeming to choose her words carefully. "Not after my engagement ended badly and the scandal touched my family." Scandal. "My fiancé was a prominent man, a banker's son, well-connected, approved of by everyone who mattered. We were engaged for a year, planning a spring wedding. Then I discovered he had a mistress, and a child with that mistress, and gambling debts he'd hidden from everyone, including his father." Her hands twisted in her lap. "When I confronted him, he told me women like me, educated, opinionated women, were useful for appearance but not for actual marriage. Said once we were wed, I'd quit my nonsense about teaching and focus on providing him with legitimate heirs and maintaining his social standing." Ethan stared at her profile, seeing the tightness around her mouth, the rigid set of her shoulders. "What did you do?" "I called off the engagement, publicly, at our engagement party, in front of Boston's finest society." A bitter smile curved her lips. "I told them all exactly why. The mistress, the child, the debts, his plans to cage me in a marriage built on lies. The scandal was spectacular." "Good for you." She turned to him, surprise clear in her expression. "Most people didn't think so. My parents were mortified. My father's medical practice suffered. My friends abandoned me. Apparently being right matters less than being proper. The gossip made it impossible for me to teach in any Boston school. No one would hire a woman with my reputation." "So you came west?" "So I came west," she agreed. "Where no one knows my history and no one cares about Boston society. Where being unmarried at 25 is practical rather than pitiable. Where I can teach and be useful and build a life on my own terms." She met his eyes directly. "I'm not waiting for rescue, Mr. Callahan. I chose this life deliberately. The frontier may be harsh, but at least it's honest." Understanding dawned slowly. "That's why you stayed, why you helped. Because you know what it's like to have your life fall apart and have to rebuild from nothing." "Perhaps, or perhaps I simply couldn't stand by and watch 4 children lose their father when I had the skills to prevent it." Her voice turned wry. "Or perhaps I recognized a fellow stubborn soul who needed to learn that accepting help doesn't mean admitting defeat. Take your pick of motivations." "Can I choose all 3? Greedy man." But she smiled as she said it, the tension leaving her shoulders. "I should check on the children one more time before I turn in. You should probably think about sleeping yourself. You've been up longer than I'd like." "In a minute. Want to see a few more stars first." Clara rose, dusting off her skirts. "Don't stay out too long. The night air might give you a chill." She paused at the door, looking back. "Ethan, thank you for telling me about Rebecca, for trusting me with those stories. I know it wasn't easy." He nodded, unable to find words that wouldn't come out tangled with emotion. She slipped inside, leaving him alone with the vast Wyoming sky and thoughts that refused to settle into any comfortable pattern. The truth was, he was starting to understand something that terrified him. Clara Monroe had walked into his life at his lowest moment and shown him that survival could transform into something approaching hope. She'd taken his broken family and given them a glimpse of what wholeness might look like. And now, in just 7 days, she would leave and take that glimpse with her. But perhaps that was the point. Perhaps she was meant to be a reminder that life could be more than just grinding through each day, that there were still good people in the world willing to help for no reason beyond simple kindness. Perhaps her gift wasn't meant to be permanent, but catalytic, a push toward healing rather than the healing itself. Inside the cabin, he could hear her moving quietly, checking on sleeping children, banking the fire, preparing for her own rest. The sounds of domesticity, of care, of a home rather than just a shelter. He'd forgotten what that sounded like. Ethan stayed on the porch until the stars were so thick they looked like they'd been spilled across the sky with a careless hand. He thought about Rebecca's stories, about Clara's scars, about his children growing up in a world that was both beautiful and brutal. He thought about rattlesnakes and loaves of bread and the strange paths that led strangers to save each other. And when he finally made his way inside, moving slowly but steadily, his left hand still aching but his heart somehow lighter than it had been in months, he found Clara asleep in the rocking chair, wrapped in a quilt, her face peaceful in the dying firelight. He stood there for a long moment, memorizing the scene. This woman who'd appeared like an answer to a prayer he'd been too angry to speak, who'd given his children their laughter back, who'd shown him that accepting help was its own kind of strength. 7 more days. He would make the most of every one. Morning light found Clara already at work in the kitchen, her hands deep in flour as she kneaded dough with the practiced rhythm of someone who'd done it 1,000 times. Ethan watched from the doorway, his left hand still bound, but the swelling finally receding enough that he could flex his fingers without wanting to scream. 6 days. 6 days since the snake bite, and his body was slowly, grudgingly remembering how to function. "You're up early," Clara said without turning, somehow sensing his presence. "How's the hand?" "Better. Still hurts like hell, but better." He made his way to the table, proud that he only had to steady himself once against the wall. "You don't sleep much, do you?" "Habit from my teaching days in Boston. The early morning is the only quiet time you get when you live in a boarding house full of other young women." She shaped the dough into loaves and set them aside to rise. "Besides, bread doesn't bake itself, and these children eat like they're hollow." "Isam." As if summoned by the mention of food, Benjamin's cry pierced the morning quiet. Clara wiped her hands on her apron. "I'll get him." "No." The word came out more forcefully than Ethan intended. "I'll do it. I should be able to care for my own son." Something shifted in Clara's expression. Approval, perhaps, or relief. "All right, but call if you need help. He's been fussy the last few nights. Might be getting a tooth." Ethan made his way to the cradle, moving carefully, aware of Clara's eyes on him even as she returned to her work. Benjamin's face was red with indignation, his tiny fists pumping the air. When Ethan lifted him, awkwardly, having to favor his injured hand, the baby's cries intensified briefly before settling into hiccuping whimpers. "Hey there, little man. Let's get you sorted out." The diaper change was a clumsy affair, made worse by having only one fully functional hand, but Ethan managed it without disaster. He even got a clean gown on his son, though it took 3 times as long as it should have. By the time he settled into the rocking chair with Benjamin and a bottle of goat's milk, sweat beaded his forehead and his arm trembled with fatigue. But Benjamin drank greedily, his small hand curling around Ethan's thumb, his dark eyes, Rebecca's eyes, fixed on his father's face with that intense focus babies sometimes had. Ethan felt something crack open in his chest, some barrier he'd erected without realizing it. "I'm sorry," he whispered, so quietly Clara couldn't possibly hear over the sounds of her working. "I'm sorry I've been so angry. Sorry I blamed you. You didn't ask to be born. You didn't ask for any of this." His voice broke. "Your mama wanted you so much. She was so happy when she found out she was carrying you. Used to talk to you, tell you all about the life we'd have together. She would have loved you so much." Benjamin blinked solemnly, still drinking, and Ethan could almost convince himself the baby understood. The morning unfolded in a pattern that was becoming familiar. Breakfast chaos with the twins arguing over who got more bacon, Sarah spilling her milk and crying at the perceived catastrophe, Clara moving between crises with unflappable calm. But today was different because Ethan was part of it, helping where he could, even if that help was limited to keeping Benjamin entertained while Clara managed the other 3. After breakfast, Clara announced it was time to tackle the laundry, a task that had been building for days. She heated water in the big kettle while Ethan sat on the porch, supposedly supervising the children, but mostly just watching her work. The way she moved spoke of efficiency born from necessity, no wasted motion, everything done with purpose. "You're staring," Clara said without looking up from the washboard. "Sorry, just thinking." "About? About how you make everything look easy when I know damn well it's not." She laughed, the sound bright in the morning air. "Oh, it's not easy at all. I'm just better at hiding the struggle than you are." She wrung out one of Michael's shirts with a vicious twist. "Although I will say, doing laundry for 5 people is considerably easier than doing it for 100 boarding students, which I did for 2 years at Miss Porter's school before I started teaching. You did laundry at a fancy school? Someone had to, and the regular laundress took ill. I volunteered. Clara moved to the next garment, her hands red from the hot water and harsh soap. Taught me more about the reality of women's work than all my education combined. Most of my fellow teachers thought I was mad, degrading myself with servants' work, but I learned that no honest labor is degrading. Pride might be, but work never is. Matthew came running up, his face flushed with excitement. Miss Clara, Papa, there's a wagon coming, a big one. Ethan pushed himself to his feet, instinctively moving toward the rifle before remembering he couldn't shoot worth a damn with his left hand. But Clara had already shaded her eyes against the sun, peering at the approaching dust cloud. It's all right. That's the Hendersons' wagon. I recognize their team. Sure enough, the wagon that rolled into the yard 10 minutes later was driven by Silas Henderson, his wife Martha beside him, and their grown daughter Rose in the back, surrounded by crates and baskets. Ethan felt his face heat with embarrassment, more charity, more people seeing his failures. Now don't you go getting all prideful, Martha called before she'd even climbed down from the wagon. She was a formidable woman, built like a ship's prow, with iron-gray hair and a voice that could carry across a canyon. We brought supplies and there'll be no arguing about it. Consider it payment for all the times you helped Silas mend fence last year. Ma'am, Hush. Martha was already directing Rose to start unloading. We've got smoked ham, preserves, fresh eggs, flour, sugar, coffee, and enough vegetables to see you through the week. Rose here is getting married next month to that Peterson boy, and she's been practicing her cooking. You'll be doing us a favor by eating it so we don't all get fat as Christmas geese. Clara appeared at Ethan's elbow, her voice low. Just say thank you. Fighting her is like fighting a prairie fire. You'll only exhaust yourself and lose anyway. So Ethan said thank you and meant it, even as his pride chafed at accepting yet more help. The twins descended on Rose, who they knew from previous visits, begging her to play with them. Sarah emerged from the cabin, saw the commotion, and hid behind Clara's skirts, suddenly shy. My goodness, Clara, you've worked miracles here, Martha said, taking in the clean cabin, the organized chaos of well-tended children, the laundry flapping on the line. Place was a disaster when we stopped by last week. Thought we'd have to haul Ethan and the children back to our place just to keep them alive. The disaster was temporary, Clara said mildly. Everything's manageable with the right approach. And with you here to manage it. Martha's shrewd eyes moved between Clara and Ethan, and he could practically see her thoughts forming. Shame you have to leave for that teaching position. These children have taken to you something wonderful, and Ethan here looks like he's slept for the first time in a year. Mrs. Henderson, Ethan said, a warning in his voice. He knew that tone, that speculative gleam. The frontier had few unmarried women, and matchmaking was a favorite pastime of the married ones. Oh, hush! I'm not suggesting anything improper, just observing facts. But Martha's smile suggested she was suggesting plenty. Now, Clara, you come help me get these things put away proper. Rose, you keep the children entertained. Silas, you and Ethan go check that fence line he mentioned. Do the man good to walk his property, remind himself he's got a ranch to run. Within minutes, Ethan found himself walking his fence line with Silas, a man of 60 who'd ranched in Wyoming since before the war. They walked in companionable silence for a while, checking posts and wires, making note of repairs needed. Ethan's hand throbbed with every step, his body protesting the exertion, but it felt good to be doing something productive, something that reminded him he was still a rancher and not just an invalid. Hell of a thing, that snakebite, Silas finally said, tamping tobacco into his pipe. Lucky the Monroe woman came when she did. Lucky doesn't begin to cover it. Martha thinks you should marry her. Ethan stopped walking, staring at the older man. What? The Monroe woman. Martha thinks you two would suit. Says she's practical and good with children, and you need a wife, and that's that. Silas lit his pipe, puffing until the tobacco glowed. Don't shoot the messenger. I'm just telling you what she's plotting. I can't. I'm not. Ethan struggled to form a coherent thought. Rebecca's only been gone a year. Yep, And you've got 4 children who need a mother, a ranch that needs tending, and a life that's got to go on whether you want it to or not. Silas's voice was matter of fact, free of judgment. Not saying Martha's right, just saying she's thinking about it, which means she'll be talking about it, which means half the county will be talking about it by next week. Christ. Welcome to frontier life, where everyone knows your business, and half of them think they can run it better than you can. Silas clapped him on the shoulder. Don't borrow trouble. You've got enough without adding gossip to the pile. Just figured you should know what's coming. They finished the fence inspection in silence, Ethan's mind churning. Marry Clara? The idea was absurd. He'd known her less than a week. She was his children's caretaker out of necessity, not some romantic prospect. Besides, she'd made it clear she'd come west to build her own life, not to become some desperate widower's convenient solution. And yet, as they walked back toward the cabin and he saw Clara hanging more laundry while singing to Sarah, saw the way his children gravitated toward her like flowers toward sun, saw the way she'd transformed his home from a place of despair into something approaching peace, he couldn't deny the traitorous thought that Martha Henderson might be on to something. The thought made him feel sick with guilt. Rebecca, Dave, what kind of husband, what kind of man did that make him? You're thinking too hard, Silas observed. I can hear the gears grinding from here. Just tired. Sure you are. But Silas didn't push, for which Ethan was grateful. The Hendersons stayed for lunch, ham sandwiches and fresh milk, the children eating with the focused intensity of those who rarely saw such bounty. Conversation flowed around the table, mostly Martha and Clara discussing the upcoming school term, while Rose entertained the twins with stories about her upcoming wedding. Ethan ate mechanically, hyper-aware of every glance Martha shot his way, every time Clara laughed at something Sarah said, every moment that his traitorous mind whispered, maybe, maybe, maybe. After lunch, while Clara helped Rose clean up the dishes and the children napped, Martha cornered Ethan on the porch. She didn't waste time with subtlety. That woman is exactly what you and these children need. Mrs. Henderson, don't you Mrs. Henderson me. I've known you since you were barely older than your Matthew, and I've watched you try to manage alone this past year. It's killing you, boy. Slowly but surely, it's eating you alive. Her voice softened. Rebecca was a good woman, and you loved her. No one's asking you to forget her, but she's gone, and you're here, and those babies need a mother. They have a mother, had a mother. They have a memory of a mother, which isn't the same thing. Sarah barely remembers her. Benjamin never knew her at all. And the twins, they're starting to forget what her voice sounded like, Ethan. I've heard Matthew ask Clara questions about cooking and mending, things his mama would have taught him, that break your heart like it breaks mine. It did. God help him, it did. Ethan's hands clenched on the porch railing. What do you want me to do? Propose to a woman I barely know? Ask her to give up her teaching position and her independence to marry some broken-down rancher with 4 children? I want you to think about it, consider it, because right now you're so buried in grief and pride that you can't see what's right in front of you. A good woman who already loves your children, who fits into your life like she was made for it, who looks at you like you're worth saving even when you don't think you are. Martha's voice turned brisk. I'm not saying propose tomorrow. I'm saying wake up and realize that sometimes God sends exactly what we need in the exact moment we need it, even if it doesn't look like what we expected. Before Ethan could formulate a response, Silas appeared around the corner of the cabin. Martha, we need to head back. Storm's building to the west, and I want to get home before it hits. Sure enough, dark clouds were massing on the horizon, moving fast. The Hendersons made their goodbyes quickly, Rose extracting promises from the twins to visit soon, Martha hugging Clara like they were old friends. Silas pressing something into Ethan's hand. Money, he realized, a handful of silver dollars. Payment for that horse you sold me last fall, Silas said before Ethan could protest. Been meaning to settle up. Now we're square. They both knew it was a lie. Ethan had already been paid for that horse, but Silas's expression brooked no argument. The money disappeared into Ethan's pocket, another weight of obligation pressing down on his shoulders. The wagon rolled away, leaving Ethan and Clara standing in the yard as the wind picked up, carrying the smell of approaching rain. The children were still napping, the cabin quiet behind them. Clara wrapped her arms around herself, watching the storm approach. Martha Henderson is a force of nature, she said. That's one way of putting it. She thinks we should get married. Ethan's head whipped around, his heart suddenly pounding. She said that to you? Not in so many words, but frontier women aren't known for their subtlety. Clara's voice was carefully neutral. She pointed out that I'm good with children, you need help, and marriages have been built on far less practical foundations. I'm sorry, she had no right. She had every right to speak her mind, even if her mind is focused on matchmaking rather than reality. Clara turned to face him fully, her gray eyes serious. Ethan, I need you to understand something. I didn't stay here expecting anything beyond the chance to help someone in need. I don't want you thinking you're obligated to me, that you owe me anything more than the gratitude you've already expressed. I know that. I do, but... He stopped, unsure what he was trying to say. But Martha planted a seed, and now you're wondering if maybe she's right. Clara's smile was sad. I understand. You're desperate and exhausted and still grieving, and I showed up at the right moment to make your life bearable again. That's not love, Ethan. That's gratitude mixed with relief. There's a difference. How do you know what I'm feeling? Because I felt the same thing once. She looked away toward the approaching storm. After my engagement ended, there was a man, a doctor at my father's practice. He was kind to me when everyone else was spreading gossip. He offered to marry me, to save my reputation, to give me security. And for about 10 minutes I considered it, because it would have been so much easier than facing the world alone. What stopped you? The realization that easy isn't the same as right. That marrying him would have been using him as a shield against my problems, rather than actually building a life with him. That he deserved better than being someone's convenient solution. She met his eyes again, just like I deserve better than being yours. The words stung, mostly because they were true. Ethan opened his mouth to argue, to protest that it wasn't like that, but honesty stopped him. Wasn't that exactly what he'd been thinking? That Clara could solve his problems, make his life manageable, give his children what they needed? How was that different from using her? You're right, he said quietly. I'm sorry. Don't apologize. You're human, and you're struggling, and your community is pressuring you toward an easy answer. But Ethan, if you ever did think about remarrying, to me or anyone else, it should be because you actually want a wife, a partner, not because you need a cook and a nursemaid. Children can sense the difference, and they deserve better than a loveless marriage of convenience. Thunder rumbled in the distance. The first drops of rain began to fall, fat and warm. Clara turned toward the cabin. I should check on the children. Storms sometimes wake Sarah. She left him standing in the yard as the rain intensified, soaking through his shirt, running down his face like the tears he refused to shed. She was right about everything, which made it worse. He didn't love Clara Monroe. He loved what she represented: order, peace, hope, a way forward. He loved the version of his family that existed with her in it. But that wasn't the same as loving her. The storm hit with the sudden violence typical of the high plains. Wind that threatened to tear the roof off, rain that turned the yard to mud within minutes, lightning that split the sky with electric fury. Ethan made his way inside, dripping, to find Clara had indeed been right about Sarah. The little girl stood in the middle of the main room, sobbing, arms outstretched. The twins huddled together on their bed, eyes wide with fear. Only Benjamin slept through the chaos, his young life having taught him to sleep through anything. I've got her. Ethan scooped Sarah up despite his aching hand, and she buried her face against his neck, her small body shaking. Hey now, baby girl. It's just weather, just noise. Can't hurt you in here. Scared, Sarah whimpered. Loud. I know, but Papa's here. Miss Clara's here. We're all safe. He carried her to the rocking chair, settling down with a wince as his overtaxed body protested. Through the rain-streaked window, he could see the prairie transformed into a gray blur, the storm consuming everything. Clara moved to the twins' bed, sitting between them, gathering them close. You know what my father used to tell me during storms? He said thunder was just the sky's way of applauding the lightning's beautiful work. Every boom meant the sky was saying, well done, beautiful, excellent job. Matthew giggled nervously. Really? Really? And the rain? That's the sky crying happy tears because the lightning made something so pretty. She squeezed them both. Nothing to be scared of, just a loud, wet celebration up in the clouds. Michael considered this seriously. Can we celebrate loud too? Not quite that loud, but we could sing if you'd like. Singing makes storms less frightening. So Clara sang, her clear voice rising above the thunder, and slowly the children's fear transformed into wonder. Even Sarah lifted her head from Ethan's neck, listening, her tears drying on her flushed cheeks. The twins joined in on the chorus, their young voices brave and slightly off-key. And Ethan, holding his daughter while watching Clara transform terror into music, felt something shift deep in his chest. Not love. Not yet. But the recognition that love might be possible someday, if he let himself heal enough to feel something beyond grief and guilt. That this woman, complicated and brave and utterly herself, might be worth considering not as a solution to his problems, but as a person in her own right. That maybe, eventually, he could want something for himself instead of just surviving for his children. The storm passed as quickly as it had come, leaving the world washed clean and smelling of wet sage. The children's energy, pent up from being inside, exploded in demands to go outside, to jump in puddles, to catch the last of the raindrops. Clara negotiated a compromise. They could go out if they stayed in the yard and came in the moment they were called. The children thundered outside, even Sarah, who'd recovered from her fright with the resilience of the very young. Through the window, Ethan watched them splash and play, their laughter carrying on the freshened air. 4 more days, Clara said softly, coming to stand beside him. Then I have to leave. I know. Will you be all right? The question deserved an honest answer. Ethan thought about it, really thought about it, taking inventory of his body and his mind and his battered soul. I don't know, probably not at first, but I'll manage. Thanks to you, I know it's possible now. Good. She was quiet for a moment. Ethan, about what I said earlier, I didn't mean to be harsh. You're not wrong to want help, to need someone. I just wanted to make sure you understood that whatever happens, it should be because you truly want it, not because you're desperate. I understand. And you weren't harsh, you were honest, which is worth more. He turned to face her. Can I ask you something? Of course. Do you ever want to marry, have a family, or is teaching enough for you? Clara's expression turned thoughtful. I don't know. I thought I wanted marriage once, obviously, but that disaster taught me I didn't really know myself well enough to choose a partner. Out here, I've been content building my own life, having my independence. The school children give me purpose. But sometimes, she paused, watching the children play. Sometimes I wonder what it would be like to have children of my own, to build something permanent instead of just helping others build their lives. You'd be a good mother. Maybe, or maybe I'm better suited to being a teacher, loving children intensely but temporarily, then letting them go. She smiled, but it was tinged with melancholy. Not everyone is meant for the same life, Ethan. Some of us are meant to wander, to teach, to touch lives briefly, but meaningfully. That might be enough. But she didn't sound convinced, and Ethan suspected she was trying to convince herself as much as him. The thought that this remarkable woman might spend her life alone, pouring herself into other people's children while denying herself the family she clearly wanted, struck him as deeply wrong. She deserved more. Deserved everything. The realization surprised him with its intensity. When had he started thinking about what Clara deserved rather than just what she could do for him? When had she transformed from convenient salvation into a person whose happiness mattered? Outside, Michael had discovered a particularly deep puddle and was now soaked to the skin, Sarah squealing with delight as he splashed her. Matthew stood at the edge, torn between dignity and desire, before finally surrendering and jumping in fully clothed. Their joy was infectious, absolute, the kind of happiness that existed only in childhood. They're healing, Clara observed. A month ago, according to Mrs. Henderson, they barely smiled. Now listen to them. That's your doing? No, that's time and stability and having their basic needs met consistently. I just provided the framework. You're the one who loves them enough to keep trying even when it felt impossible. She touched his arm briefly, a gesture of comfort. Don't diminish your own strength, Ethan. You survived the worst year of your life and kept 4 children alive and safe. That's not failure, that's heroism. He wanted to believe her, wanted to accept the absolution she offered, But guilt was a hard habit to break, and the weight of his perceived failures still pressed heavy on his shoulders. Still, something in him had loosened over these past days, some knot of self-recrimination beginning to unravel. Maybe that was enough for now. Maybe healing came in small increments. One day of managing the children without complete disaster, one night of sleeping through without nightmares, one moment of feeling something other than crushing grief. Maybe he didn't have to be completely whole to keep moving forward. The children played until they were exhausted and soaked, until the sun broke through the clouds and turned the prairie into a palette of gold and green and impossible blue. When Clara finally called them in, they came reluctantly, tracking mud across the porch, dripping water all over the floor she'd scrubbed clean that morning. But she just laughed and wrapped them in towels, stripping off their wet clothes and rubbing them dry with brisk efficiency. Ethan helped where he could, which wasn't much, but he was there, present, part of it. Not perfect, but trying. Not whole, but healing. And for the first time since Rebecca died, he allowed himself to think that might be enough. The next morning arrived with a clarity that felt almost cruel. 3 days. Clara would leave in 3 days, and the thought sat in Ethan's chest like a stone. He'd woken before dawn, his hands still aching but manageable, and found her already in the kitchen as always, this time mending one of Michael's shirts by lamplight. "You're going to ruin your eyes working in this dark," he said, startling her. Clara looked up, needle paused mid-stitch. "I could say the same about you stumbling around before the sun's even thought about rising. How's the hand?" "Better every day." He flexed his fingers, wincing slightly. "Still can't make a proper fist, but I can hold things now, do things." "Good. That means the venom's finally clearing your system." She nodded off her thread and bit it clean, examining her work in the weak light. "Another few weeks and you should have most of your strength back. The numbness might linger longer, but that's normal." Ethan poured himself coffee from the pot she always had ready, marveling at how quickly he'd grown accustomed to this. Hot coffee waiting, the cabin warm, another adult presence to share the morning silence. In 3 days it would all vanish and he'd be back to cold coffee and loneliness. Clara. Her name felt strange on his tongue, intimate in a way that Miss Monroe hadn't been. "I've been thinking about what you said, about marriage and convenience and what people deserve." She set down the mended shirt, her full attention on him now. "Have you? You were right, about all of it. I was thinking of you as a solution instead of a person, and that was wrong." He wrapped both hands around the coffee cup, needing something to hold. "But I want you to know, even if I was thinking about it wrong, the gratitude is real. What you've done for us, for my children, for me, I don't have words for it. You saved my life, and then you saved us from drowning in the aftermath. That matters. You matter." Claire's expression softened, but wariness lingered in her eyes. "I'm glad I could help, truly. But Ethan, gratitude can feel like a lot of things it's not. It can feel like affection, like connection, even like love. I don't want you confusing those feelings." "I'm not confusing anything. I know the difference between being grateful and being—" He trailed off, unsure what he was trying to say. Being what? Interested? Intrigued? Aware of her in ways that had nothing to do with her skill at managing children. "Being?" she prompted gently. "Being awake," he finally said. "For the first time in a year, I feel like I'm actually here instead of just going through the motions. And yes, part of that is because you've made everything easier, but part of it is you. The way you laugh at Sarah's nonsense words. The way you never talk down to the twins even though they're 7. The way you hum while you work. The way you see people as they are instead of as you wish they'd be." He met her eyes. "I'm not asking you to marry me. I'm not asking you for anything. I just wanted you to know that I see you too. Not as what you can do for me, but as who you are." Silence stretched between them, broken only by the soft sounds of children beginning to stir in the other room. Claire's eyes had gone bright with something that might have been tears, but she blinked them away before they could fall. "That's the kindest thing anyone said to me in a very long time," she said quietly. "Thank you. It's just the truth. The truth is often the kindest thing." She stood, smoothing her skirts, rebuilding whatever composure his words had disrupted. "I should start breakfast. The children will be hungry." But as she moved past him to the stove, her hand brushed his shoulder, brief, light, but deliberate. A wordless acknowledgement of something neither of them was quite ready to name. The day unfolded with an urgency born of limited time. Clara seemed determined to prepare Ethan for her absence, walking him through routines she'd established, showing him shortcuts she'd discovered, making lists of tasks and schedules. It was practical and necessary, and somehow heartbreaking. "Sarah does better if you let her help with simple tasks," Claire explained as they washed dishes together after breakfast. "She feels important, like she's contributing. Give her a wooden spoon to stir with, even if she's not actually stirring anything useful. It keeps her occupied and builds her confidence." Ethan dried a plate, concentrating on the movement to avoid looking at Clara. "What about the twins? They've been fighting less, but I know that won't last once you're gone." "They fight because they're bored and they feed off each other's energy. Separate them for part of each day. One helps you with outside chores, one stays inside with quieter activities. They love each other, but they need space from each other too." She handed him another plate. "And Michael needs more physical activity than Matthew. He's the one who'll get into trouble if he's not worn out by bedtime." "How do you know all this? You've only been here a week." "I watch, I listen. Children tell you what they need if you pay attention." Clara dried her hands on her apron, surveying the kitchen with the air of a general reviewing troops. "Benjamin's the easy one right now, but that'll change when he starts crawling. Make sure you fix that gap in the floorboards before then, the one where the snake came through. A baby can fit through spaces you wouldn't believe." The mention of the snake sent a chill through Ethan. That gap in the floor had nearly killed him, could still kill one of his children if he didn't address it. "I'll fix it today," and the sagging porch step, and the loose shutter on the bedroom window. "Don't overdo it. Your hand's better, but not healed." Clara moved to where her list sat on the table, pages of her neat handwriting covering everything from recipes to medical advice to suggested daily schedules. "I've written down everything I can think of. Mrs. Henderson said she'd come by twice a week. Reverend Walsh knows to check on you. And Doc Miller left medicine for your hand. Make sure you take it all, even when you feel better." "Yes, ma'am." He meant it teasingly, but it came out sincere. Clara looked at him then, really looked at him, and something passed between them, recognition, perhaps, of what they were both trying not to acknowledge. That this week had been more than just crisis management. That somewhere between the snakebite and the storm, between dishwashing and child wrangling, something had shifted. "Papa!" Matthew's voice shattered the moment. "Michael says I can't ride your horse, but you said I could yesterday." "I said you could sit on the horse, not ride it," Ethan called back, grateful for the interruption. "There's a difference." The dispute required mediation, which led to both twins wanting to do something with the horse, which led to Ethan spending the next hour carefully supervising while they took turns sitting in the saddle while the horse stood patiently in the yard. His gelding, a steady beast named Copper, tolerated the children with the forbearance of a saint. Clara watched from the porch, Benjamin on her hip, Sarah playing at her feet, and Ethan found himself hyper-aware of her gaze. When had he started performing for her? Wanting her to see him as competent, as a good father, as something more than just a desperate widower? The realization unsettled him. After lunch, sandwiches that Clara had somehow made interesting with herbs from the garden and cheese from the Hendersons' supplies, she announced that she needed to ride into Prosperity to collect her things from the boarding house and inform the school board officially of her presence. "I'll be back before supper," she said, already tying on her bonnet. "The children should nap. Try to rest too. You pushed yourself hard this morning." "I'll be fine. We'll be fine." But Ethan's voice lacked conviction. Clara paused at the door, something unreadable in her expression. "You will be. Fine, I mean. It might not feel like it at first, but you will be." Then she was gone, riding east on her gray mare, and the cabin felt immediately emptier. The children sensed it too. They were cranky and difficult, fighting over nothing, refusing to nap despite obvious exhaustion. Ethan struggled through the afternoon, his patience fraying, his hand throbbing from overuse, his heart heavy with a loneliness he couldn't quite name. By the time Clara returned as the sun dropped toward the horizon, Ethan was ready to surrender. Michael had thrown a spectacular tantrum over being denied more bread with honey. Sarah had spilled an entire cup of water on the floor and then sat in it, soaking her dress. Matthew had somehow gotten into the flour and covered himself head to toe in white powder, and Benjamin, sensing the chaos, had screamed for an hour straight. Clara took one look at the disaster and laughed, not unkindly, but with genuine amusement. "Well, I see you've all been very productive in my absence." "It's not funny," Ethan said, but even he could hear how close to laughter or tears or both he was. "It's absolutely funny. Look at Matthew. He looks like a ghost." She set down her saddlebags and rolled up her sleeves. "All right, monsters. Who wants to help me make supper?" Somehow, impossibly, she had them all settled within 20 minutes. Matthew swept up the flour he'd spilled, feeling important with his task. Michael set the table, carefully placing each fork and knife. Sarah sat on a chair pushed up to the counter, helping Clara mix biscuit dough by poking it with one finger. Benjamin dozed in his cradle, finally at peace. The chaos transformed into productivity as if she'd waved a magic wand. "How do you do that?" Ethan asked, watching her work. "Do what?" "Make it all seem possible. When you're here, I think maybe I can handle this. The moment you leave, it all falls apart." Clara's hands stilled in the dough. "It doesn't fall apart, Ethan. It gets messy and loud and difficult, but that's not the same as falling apart. You kept them safe. You kept them fed. You managed, even if it wasn't pretty." "Barely." "Barely is still managing." She resumed kneading, her voice firm. "You're not going to get everything perfect. No parent does. You're going to have days where the children are monsters and you want to run away. You're going to burn supper and lose your temper and wonder what you're doing wrong. That's not failure. That's parenthood. You make it look easy. Because you're seeing me at my best after I've already figured out what works. You didn't see me in Boston, struggling with a classroom of 30 students, crying in the washroom because I couldn't control them, certain I was the worst teacher who ever lived." She shaped the dough into biscuits with practiced efficiency. "Everyone struggles. The difference is whether you let the struggle defeat you or teach you." Ethan absorbed this, wanting to believe it, afraid to hope. "What did you learn in Boston when you were struggling?" "That perfection is the enemy of good enough. That children need consistency more than they need excellence. That showing up and trying even when you're failing matters more than getting it right." She slid the biscuits into the Dutch oven, nestled it in the coals, and covered it with more coals from the fire. "And that asking for help isn't weakness, it's wisdom." "Is that why you helped me? To practice what you preach?" "I helped you because you needed help, and I was able to give it. Everything else is just philosophy." But her smile suggested there was more to it than that. Supper was simple but good: salt pork, beans, and Clara's biscuits, which the children devoured like they were starving. Conversation flowed easily, the children chattering about their day, Clara telling stories about the town she'd visited, Ethan contributing less but feeling included nonetheless. It was the kind of meal families shared, the kind he and Rebecca used to have before grief had poisoned everything. After the children were in bed, a process that took an hour and involved multiple glasses of water, trips to the outhouse, and reassurances about monsters, Ethan and Clara found themselves on the porch again, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. 2 more nights of this. 2 more nights of shared silence and easy companionship before she left, and he was alone again. "I went to the schoolhouse today," Clara said. "Met with the board, saw my classroom. It's small but well equipped. The parents seem eager to have their children educated." "That's good." "It is. I'm lucky to have this position." But she didn't sound entirely happy about it. "What's wrong?" Clara was quiet for a long time. When she spoke, her voice was careful, measured. "Nothing's wrong, exactly. I'm grateful for the opportunity. It's everything I wanted when I left Boston. Independence, purpose, a chance to make a difference. But standing in that empty classroom today, imagining it full of other people's children, I felt..." "What?" "Lonely." The word came out soft, almost ashamed, which is foolish because I knew what this life would be. I chose it deliberately. Teaching is important work, and I'm good at it. I should be satisfied with that. Should is a terrible word. Should doesn't care about what you actually feel. She turned to look at him, surprise evident even in the dim light. "That's unexpectedly wise." "Rebecca used to say it. Whenever I'd talk about what I should feel or should want, she'd tell me should was just another way of saying I was lying to myself. The memory didn't hurt quite as much as it used to. She was right about a lot of things. She sounds like she was remarkable. She was. Ethan paused, then added, but that doesn't mean she was perfect. She could be stubborn as a mule when she got an idea in her head, terrible at managing money, burned dinner more often than not, sang off key. Clara laughed softly. Why are you telling me this? Because I've been treating her memory like something sacred and untouchable, making her into a saint instead of remembering her as a person. And that's not fair to her or to me or to the children. She was human, wonderful and flawed and human. I loved her, but I can admit she wasn't perfect. That's growth, Clara said quietly. Being able to hold both the love and the reality without one diminishing the other. They fell silent again, but it was a different quality of silence now, something settling between them, some mutual understanding that didn't require words. Ethan felt it like a physical presence, this acknowledgement that they'd both been changed by the past week, that neither would leave this experience the same as they'd entered it. I'm afraid, Clara said suddenly, of leaving, of going back to being alone. I've spent the past 5 years convincing myself that solitude and independence were the same thing, that I didn't need anyone. But this week, she stopped, seeming to struggle with the words. This week, I remembered what it feels like to be part of something, to be needed in a way that matters, to wake up knowing the day has purpose beyond just getting through it. Then stay. The words escaped before Ethan could stop them, hanging in the air between them like a prayer. Clara's head whipped around, her eyes wide. Ethan, I know what you said about convenience and gratitude and not confusing feelings. I know you have a life you've built and a teaching position waiting. But Clara, these children, they've been more alive this week than in the entire year since Rebecca died. They laugh again, they play, they ask questions and tell jokes and act like children instead of traumatized survivors. That's because of you. That's because they're healing. They'd heal with time regardless. Maybe, but slower, harder, without someone showing them it's okay to be happy again. He turned to face her fully, his heart pounding. I'm not asking you to give up everything for us. I'm not proposing marriage or expecting you to become an instant mother. I'm just asking, is there any way you could stay, even part-time? We could figure something out, some arrangement where you could teach and still be part of their lives. That's not how teaching works. The school needs someone full-time, and Prosperity is 10 miles from here. I can't ride back and forth every day. Then teach them. The twins will need schooling in a year or two anyway. You could start a school out here, take on other children from neighboring ranches. Parents would pay. Everyone's desperate for proper education. You'd still be teaching, still be independent, but you'd be here too. Clara stared at him like he'd grown a second head. That's not a small ask, Ethan. You're suggesting I completely change my plans, my life, on the basis of 1 week. I know it's crazy and presumptuous and probably wildly unfair of me to even suggest it, but I'm asking anyway because he stopped, forcing himself to be honest. Because the thought of you leaving and never seeing you again feels wrong in a way I can't explain. Because my children already love you. Because in 1 week you've reminded me that life can be more than just survival. And what about what I want? What I feel? What do you feel? The question hung between them, charged with possibility and fear. Clara looked away toward the dark prairie, her jaw tight. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I feel terrified. Because I came here expecting to deliver bread and move on with my life. And instead I found... She made a frustrated sound. I found a family that fits me in ways I didn't know I needed. Children who look at me like I hung the moon. A man who sees me as a person instead of a convenient solution to his problems. And now you're asking me to throw away everything I've built to chase something that might not even work. Or it might work better than anything either of us planned. Or it might end in disaster and heartbreak, and I'd be left with nothing. No independence, no position, no certainty. She turned back to him, and in the starlight he could see tears tracking down her cheeks. Don't you understand? I've spent 5 years building walls to protect myself from exactly this kind of risk. from hoping for something I might not get, from wanting things I'm not sure I deserve. Why wouldn't you deserve them? Because I'm not the woman I pretend to be. The words burst from her like they'd been held back too long. I'm not brave or self-sufficient or perfectly content with my independent life. I'm scared and lonely and so tired of pretending that being alone is the same as being strong. When I stood in that schoolhouse today, all I could think was that I'd be going home to an empty room, eating dinner alone, spending another year with children who'd leave me at the end of each day. And then I thought about this cabin, about your children, about mornings making coffee and evenings watching stars, and I wanted it so badly I could taste it. Then take it, stay and take it. It's not that simple. Why not? Because, she stopped, her breath hitching. Because, what if it doesn't last? What if you wake up in 6 months and realize you don't actually want me here, that I was just a bandage for your grief? What if the children decide they don't want another mother? What if I'm terrible at this and I fail everyone, including myself? Ethan stood, closing the distance between them in 2 steps. He took her hands in his, the right one still strong, the left weaker, but healing. What if it works? What if 6 months from now we're happier than either of us has been in years? What if the children keep growing and thriving? What if we build something real and lasting and good? You can't promise that. No. I can't promise anything except that I'll try, that I'll show up every day and do my best and never take you for granted, that I'll respect your independence even while hoping you'll choose to share your life with us, that I'll love my wife's memory without letting it poison a future that could be beautiful. You're not in love with me. No, he admitted, the honesty hard but necessary. I'm not. Not yet. But I could be, Clara. I can feel it. The possibility, the potential. I see who you are, and I want to know more. I want to learn what makes you laugh, what you dream about, what scares you. I want to build something with you, not because I need a solution, but because I choose you, deliberately, hopefully, probably foolishly. Clara's hands tightened on his, her tears falling freely now. This is insane. We've known each other a week. People don't make life decisions based on a week. Frontier people do. Rebecca and I knew each other 3 months before we married, and most people thought that was reckless. But it worked because we wanted it to work, because we chose each other every day, even when things got hard. He squeezed her hands gently. I'm not asking you to marry me tomorrow. I'm asking you to consider staying, to give this, whatever this is, a chance to become something more, to stop running from the possibility of happiness because you're afraid it might hurt. Of course I'm afraid it might hurt. Everything good in my life has hurt eventually. So has everything in mine, but that doesn't mean we stop trying. Ethan pulled her closer, wanting her to hear him, to believe him. Clara, you walked into my life with a loaf of bread when I was dying, and you've been saving me every day since. Not just from the snake venom, but from the poison of grief and hopelessness. You made me remember that life could be good again. Don't you think you deserve the same chance? To stop surviving and start living? She was crying in earnest now, silent sobs that shook her shoulders. Ethan did the only thing that felt right. He pulled her into his arms, holding her while she wept against his chest. She felt small and strong simultaneously, this woman who'd carried so much alone for so long. Her arms came up around him, holding tight, and they stood there on the porch under the Wyoming stars while she cried out years of loneliness and fear and desperate hoping she'd tried to deny. When the tears finally subsided, Clara pulled back enough to look at him, her eyes red and puffy and beautiful in their vulnerability. I need to think. This is too big to decide in one night on the basis of one conversation. Take all the time you need, just don't leave tomorrow without giving me an answer. Please. She nodded, then surprised him by reaching up to touch his face, her fingers gentle against his bearded jaw. You're a good man, Ethan Callahan. Better than you give yourself credit for. Whatever I decide, I want you to know that. Then she slipped past him into the cabin, leaving him alone with the stars and a heart that felt simultaneously lighter and more terrified than it had in years. He'd done it. He'd asked for what he wanted instead of just accepting what he thought he deserved. He'd been honest about his feelings, even though they weren't perfect or complete. He'd risked rejection and heartbreak for the possibility of something better. Now all he could do was wait and hope that sometimes, miraculously, the universe gave people second chances at happiness they hadn't known they needed. Sleep refused to come that night. Ethan lay in his bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the familiar sounds of the cabin settling, the soft breathing of his children, and, new, precious, the quiet movements of Clara in the main room. She hadn't gone to bed either. He could hear her pacing, the occasional creak of the rocking chair, the rustle of paper as she presumably reviewed her lists or read or did anything to occupy a mind too full of questions. He'd asked too much. The realization settled over him with the weight of regret. What right did he have to ask this woman to upend her entire life for him and his children? She'd worked hard to build her independence, to create a life free from the expectations and judgments that had driven her from Boston. And here he was, asking her to give it all up for the uncertain possibility of happiness with a man she barely knew and 4 children who weren't hers. But even as guilt churned in his gut, another voice whispered that he'd been right to ask, that Clara deserved to know she was wanted, that she had options beyond lonely independence, that someone saw her worth beyond what she could provide. She could still say no. She would probably say no. But at least she'd know the choice existed. The night stretched endless. At some point, Benjamin woke crying, and Ethan heard Clara's footsteps moving to soothe him before he could get up himself. Her voice drifted through the darkness, humming some tune he didn't recognize, and Benjamin's cries faded to whimpers and then silence. The cabin settled back into quiet, but Ethan remained awake, watching the darkness slowly give way to gray dawn. When he finally emerged from his room, moving quietly to avoid waking the children, he found Clara already dressed, standing at the window with a cup of coffee cradled in her hands. She looked like she'd slept as little as he had, shadows under her eyes, hair not quite as neat as usual, shoulders tight with tension. "Morning," he said softly. She turned, and something in her expression made his heart stutter. "I'm staying." The words hung in the air, so unexpected that Ethan wasn't sure he'd heard correctly. "What?" "I'm staying. Not forever. I can't promise forever when we barely know each other. But I'll stay through the winter at least. I'll write to the school board this morning, decline the position, and tell them to find another teacher." Clara set down her coffee with a decisive click. "I'll start a small school here like you suggested, take on the twins and any other children from neighboring ranches whose parents want proper education. It'll be slower to build than a town position, but it's possible." Ethan crossed the room in 3 strides, stopping just short of touching her, afraid that if he reached out she might dissolve like morning mist. "You're sure, Clara? I don't want you to—" "I've been up all night thinking about it, listing every rational reason why I should say no, why this is reckless and foolish and potentially catastrophic." Her voice was steady despite the fear in her eyes. "But every time I imagined riding away from here, leaving these children, leaving you, leaving the possibility of something real, it felt wrong. More wrong than staying feels scary." "What changed your mind?" "You did. When you asked, what if it works, instead of assuming it would fail. When you admitted you're not in love with me yet, but you could be. When you held me while I cried and didn't try to fix me or promise impossible things." She finally met his eyes fully. "You were honest. About your feelings, your fears, your limitations. That's rarer than you know. Most men would have made grand promises or declarations. You just offered truth and possibility. That felt like something worth taking a risk for." Ethan felt his throat tighten. "I want to hug you. Is that all right?" Clara's laugh was shaky but genuine. "Yes, you fool. That's all right." He pulled her close, and she came willingly, her arms wrapping around his waist, her head against his chest. She fit there perfectly, he realized. Not too tall, not too short, just right. Like maybe the universe did occasionally arrange things properly after all. "Thank you," he whispered into her hair. "Thank you for taking the chance, for staying, for giving me, the opportunity to see if this could work. Don't thank me yet. I might be absolutely terrible at this. I might drive you crazy within a month." But her arms tightened around him, belying the words. "Then we'll figure it out together. No expectations, no pressure. We'll just take it day by day and see what happens." They stood there as the sun rose higher, painting the prairie gold, until the sounds of children waking broke the moment. Clara pulled back, wiping her eyes, and Ethan saw the fear still lingering beneath her decision. This was terrifying for her, abandoning safety for uncertainty, trading independence for interdependence. He would need to remember that, to honor it, to make sure she never regretted choosing them. "I should start breakfast," Clara said, her voice not quite steady. "And write that letter to the school board before I lose my nerve." "Write the letter first. Breakfast can wait." She nodded and moved to the table, pulling out paper and pen from her saddlebag. Ethan busied himself with getting the children up and dressed, a process that was still chaotic but less overwhelming than it had been a week ago. Matthew and Michael were excited to learn that Miss Clara would be staying, immediately peppering her with questions about what they'd learn and whether they'd have homework, and could they tell the Henderson children they had a real teacher now. Sarah's response was simpler and more direct. She climbed into Clara's lap while she was writing, wrapped her arms around Clara's neck, and announced, "My Mama Clara." The room went silent. Clara's hand stilled on the paper, her eyes wide with shock and something that might have been pain. The twins stared, uncertain. Ethan's heart hammered against his ribs, unsure how to respond, terrified of saying the wrong thing. "Sarah, sweetheart," Clara finally said, her voice thick. "I'm not your mama. Your mama was a wonderful woman who loved you very much. She's in heaven now, watching over you." "I know." Sarah patted Clara's cheek with one sticky hand, completely matter-of-fact. "But you're here. So you're my Mama Clara, okay?" Clara looked over Sarah's head at Ethan, her eyes swimming with tears. He saw the question there. Was this all right? Was she overstepping? Would this hurt the children's memory of Rebecca? He thought about what Clara had said about holding love and reality together, about letting Rebecca be human instead of sacred. He thought about how his daughter's face glowed with happiness for the first time in a year. "Okay," he said softly, answering both Sarah and Clara. "If that's what Sarah wants, that's okay." "But our real mama, Matthew started, his face troubled. "Your real mama will always be your mama," Ethan said firmly, kneeling down to meet his son's eyes. "Nothing and no one can ever change that. The love you have for her, the memories, those are yours forever. But people's hearts are big, boys. There's room for more than one kind of love. You can love your mama who's in heaven and still care about Miss Clara who's here. One doesn't erase the other." "Is Miss Clara going to be our new mama then?" Michael asked, ever practical. "I don't know," Ethan said honestly. "Maybe someday. But right now, she's Miss Clara, your teacher, who's choosing to stay here and help our family. The rest we'll figure out as we go." Matthew considered this seriously, then nodded. "Okay. Can we have breakfast now? I'm hungry." Just like that, the moment passed, the children's attention moving on to more immediate concerns like food and the day's activities. But Clara sat frozen with Sarah still in her lap, tears spilling down her cheeks, her letter forgotten. "Hey," Ethan said softly, moving to her side. "You all right?" I wasn't prepared for—" She struggled to find words, holding Sarah tighter. "I've taught hundreds of children, Ethan. I've loved them all in my way, but I've never been someone's mama before. Even in play, even casually. That word means something. It does. And if it's too much, if it makes you uncomfortable, we can talk to Sarah, explain that No." Clara shook her head vehemently. "No, that's not what I mean. I mean, it matters. It's important. It's terrifying and wonderful, and I don't want to mess it up." She looked at him with raw vulnerability. "What if I can't be what they need? What if I'm not enough?" "You're already enough. You've been enough since the moment you walked into this disaster with a loaf of bread and refused to let me die." Ethan touched her shoulder gently. "No one's asking you to be perfect, Clara. We're just asking you to be here, to try, to let us try, together." She nodded, composing herself with visible effort, and gently set Sarah down with instructions to help her brothers set the table. Once the children were occupied, she returned to her letter with new determination, her pen moving quickly across the page. Ethan read over her shoulder without meaning to snoop, but the words caught his attention. She was apologizing to the school board, explaining that circumstances had changed, and she'd be establishing a private school on the Callahan Ranch instead. She was professional and courteous, but left no room for negotiation. When she signed her name at the bottom with a flourish, Ethan saw her hand tremble slightly. "No going back now," she said, folding the letter and sealing it with wax. "Is that regret I'm hearing?" "Fear. Terror, actually, but not regret. Not yet, anyway." She stood, squaring her shoulders. "I'll ride this into prosperity today, post it, and collect my things from the boarding house. Should be back by evening. Take Matthew with you. He could use the adventure, and you shouldn't ride alone." Clara looked surprised. "You trust me with him?" "I trust you with all of them. You've more than earned that." Ethan paused, then added, "And this way, when people start gossiping, which they will the moment you decline that position, you can honestly say you're teaching my children. It's not a lie, just not the complete truth yet. Playing chess with the frontier gossip mill. Smart." But she smiled as she said it. "All right, Matthew can come. He'll enjoy seeing the town." The boy was beside himself with excitement when informed he'd be accompanying Miss Clara to prosperity. He peppered her with questions all through breakfast. What would they see? Could they visit the general store? Would there be other children? Could he get a peppermint stick? Until even Clara's patience showed signs of strain. "Matthew," Ethan finally intervened. "Take a breath. Miss Clara can't answer if you don't let her talk." "Sorry, Papa. Sorry, Miss Clara. I'm just excited." "I know, sweetheart. And yes, if we have time and your father approves, you may have one peppermint stick." Clara shot Ethan a questioning look, and he nodded. Small luxuries meant everything to frontier children. They left mid-morning, Clara on her gray mare, and Matthew riding double behind her, his arms wrapped around her waist, his face alight with adventure. Ethan watched them ride away with Michael and Sarah flanking him, Benjamin asleep against his shoulder. The image seared itself into his memory, Clara taking his son to town, trusted with his child's safety, already part of the family in ways that transcended formal arrangements. "Is Miss Clara really staying forever?" Michael asked, squinting after the disappearing figures. "Not forever. Through the winter for certain. After that, we'll see." "I hope she stays forever. She makes good biscuits, and she doesn't yell as much as you do." Ethan looked down at his son, torn between amusement and offense. "I don't yell that much. You yell when we fight, and when Sarah spills things, and when Benjamin cries too long." Michael's tone was matter-of-fact, without judgment. "Miss Clara just fixes things instead of yelling about them." Out of the mouths of children, Ethan sighed, acknowledging the truth of it. He did yell more than he should, his patience worn thin by exhaustion and grief. Clara's calm in the face of chaos had shown him a different way, one he'd need to practice if this arrangement was going to work. The day passed slowly without Clara's presence. Ethan managed the children tolerably well. No major disasters, no injuries, everyone fed and mostly clean, but he felt her absence like a missing limb. How quickly he'd grown accustomed to sharing the burden, to having another adult to consult, to simply not being alone. It worried him, this dependence. What if she changed her mind? What if winter came and she realized she'd made a terrible mistake and left them? The thought was almost more painful than Rebecca's death had been, which brought its own guilt. But he was also proud that he'd managed on his own, that he was healing, that he could envision a future that wasn't just survival. Clara had given him that, not by doing everything for him, but by showing him it was possible to do it himself. They returned just as the sun touched the horizon, both Clara and Matthew looking wind-blown and happy. Matthew burst into the cabin with news about the town, the people they'd seen, the peppermint stick he'd shared with another boy at the general store. Clara followed more slowly, carrying her belongings in a worn carpet bag that seemed too small to contain a whole life. "How did it go?" Ethan asked quietly, while the twins monopolized their brother with questions. "Better than expected. The school board was disappointed but understanding. The boarding house owner tried to convince me I was making a mistake but accepted my decision." Clara set down her bag with an air of finality. "I'm officially unemployed and homeless, completely dependent on your hospitality. It's terrifying. You're not dependent. You're choosing to be here, which is different. And you'll be earning your keep once we get the school started properly." He'd been thinking about this all day. "We'll fix up the lean-to, make it into a proper schoolroom. Parents who send their children can pay what they can afford. Cash, goods, labor, whatever works. You'll have your own income, your own security. You've been planning. Had nothing else to do while you were gone except plan and try to keep Michael from eating all the leftover biscuits. He gestured to her bag. You can have the storage room for now. It's small, but there's a window and enough space for a bed and your things. Privacy at least. Something shifted in Clara's expression. Relief, perhaps, or gratitude. Thank you. I wasn't sure about the sleeping arrangements, didn't want to assume. Clara. He waited until she met his eyes. I meant what I said. No pressure, no expectations. You're staying as our teacher and our friend. Anything else, if there's going to be anything else, it happens slowly, naturally, when we're both ready. I'm not going to rush you into anything. Even though the whole county will assume we're courting the moment word gets out I'm living here, let them assume what they want. We know the truth, and that's what matters. He paused, then added, although for the children's sake and yours, maybe we should think about making things proper eventually. Not marriage, necessarily, but perhaps a formal courtship, just so no one questions your reputation or character. Clara laughed, the sound slightly bitter. My reputation was destroyed in Boston. I'm not sure there's much left to protect. Maybe not in Boston, but you're starting fresh here. The people in Prosperity don't know your history, and they don't need to. You're the new school teacher, respectable and proper. I'd like to keep it that way. Respectable and proper women don't live on isolated ranches with widowers, Ethan. They do if they're courting those widowers with intention toward marriage. He said it carefully, watching her reaction. I'm not proposing, but I am saying that if you're staying, if we're going to see if this can work, then maybe we should be honest about what we're doing, with the community, with each other, with ourselves. Clara was quiet for a long moment, her fingers twisting in her skirt. You're asking me to commit to courting you, to say publicly that we're working toward marriage. I'm asking if you'd be willing to consider it, if the possibility exists. His heart hammered. This was too much, too fast, pushing too hard. But the frontier didn't allow for slow courtships and lengthy deliberations. Life happened quickly here, and you either grabbed opportunity or watched it vanish into the prairie wind. Yes, Clara said finally, so softly he almost missed it. The possibility exists. I can't promise more than that, but yes, we can call it courting. We can see where it leads. Relief and terror warred in Ethan's chest. He'd done it, committed himself to trying, to opening his heart to the possibility of loving someone who wasn't Rebecca. It felt like betrayal and hope simultaneously, like standing at the edge of a cliff, unsure whether he was about to fall or fly. Thank you, he said, inadequate but sincere. Don't thank me yet. You might regret this in a month when you realize how stubborn I am about things like proper grammar and children washing behind their ears. I'll take my chances. The evening unfolded with a strange normalcy, as if Clara had always been part of their family. She settled into the storage room, which wasn't much larger than a closet but gave her privacy. Supper was chaotic but cheerful, the children energized by Matthew's tales of town. Bath time was less a battle with Clara helping. And when the children were finally in bed, Ethan and Clara found themselves on the porch again, the stars brilliant overhead. It's official now, Clara said. I sent letters to my father too, telling him I'd be staying in Wyoming indefinitely. He'll be disappointed. He'd hoped I'd eventually come home. Do you wish you could? Go home, I mean. Boston was never really home, it was just where I lived. She pulled her shawl tighter against the evening chill. Home is supposed to be where you belong, where you're understood and accepted. I never felt that they're always too opinionated, too independent, too interested in things women weren't supposed to care about. Here, at least people are too busy surviving to judge how I spend my time. For what it's worth, I like that you're opinionated and independent. Makes things interesting, Clara laughed. Wait until we have our first real argument. You might change your mind. Probably. But I'll respect you for standing your ground. He shifted to look at her. I want you to know, even though we're calling this courting, you can still change your mind any time. If this isn't working, if you're unhappy, if you realize you made a mistake, you're free to leave. I won't hold you to anything. That's either very noble or very foolish. I'm not sure which. Maybe both. He smiled wryly. But I've learned that forcing people to stay never works. Rebecca chose to be here every day, even when things got hard. That choice mattered more than any vow. If you stay, I want it to be because you're choosing us, not because you feel trapped by your decision. You're a better man than most, Ethan Callahan. I hope you know that. I'm just a man trying to do right by his children and not mess things up too badly with a woman who's far too good for him. I'm not too good for anyone. I'm just as broken and scared as you are. I'm just better at hiding it. She stood, brushing off her skirts. I should sleep. Tomorrow we start working on that schoolroom, and I want to begin teaching the twins basic lessons. Might as well put my skills to use. Clara. He stood too, catching her hand gently. Thank you. For staying. For taking the risk. For giving us a chance. She squeezed his fingers briefly. Ask me in 6 months if I'm still glad I did. I will. And I hope the answer is yes. She slipped inside, leaving him alone with the night and a heart fuller than it had been in longer than he could remember. The road ahead was uncertain, full of potential pitfalls and complications. But for the first time since Rebecca died, Ethan felt something beyond mere survival. He felt hope. Fragile and tentative, but real. The weeks that followed settled into a rhythm that felt almost miraculous. Clara transformed the lean-to into a functional schoolroom with Ethan's help, adding windows for light, building simple benches and desks, creating a space that felt purposeful and important. Word spread quickly through the scattered ranching community that the Callahan place had a teacher, and within a month 3 other families had sent their children, 2 girls aged 9 and 10 from the Henderson Ranch, and a boy of 8 from the Morrison place 5 miles west. The children, his and the others, thrived under Clara's teaching. She had a gift for making lessons engaging, turning arithmetic into games and history into stories. Even Sarah, too young for formal schooling, absorbed knowledge like a sponge, learning her letters and numbers through play. The twins, competitive as ever, pushed each other to excel, fighting over who could read faster or recite more multiplication facts. Ethan watched it all with wonder, helping where he could, fixing broken equipment, riding into town for supplies, managing the ranch work that couldn't be neglected. His hand had healed almost completely, just an occasional numbness remaining to remind him how close he'd come to dying. The ranch itself began to recover too. Fences mended, livestock properly tended, the vegetable garden cleared and prepared for spring planting. But more than the physical improvements, the household had transformed emotionally. Laughter filled the cabin regularly now. The children told jokes and played games instead of just existing in traumatized silence. Benjamin was crawling, getting into everything with the fearless curiosity of babies everywhere. And Ethan himself, he could feel the weight of grief lifting incrementally, day by day, replaced not by forgetfulness, but by the ability to remember Rebecca with joy instead of just pain. His relationship with Clara developed slowly, carefully, like a seed that needed proper conditions to grow. They talked every evening after the children slept, about everything and nothing, sharing histories and dreams and fears. He learned that she loved thunderstorms but was terrified of spiders, that she'd wanted to be a doctor like her father, but women weren't allowed in medical schools, that she cried over sad books but laughed at terrible jokes, that she snored slightly when she was especially tired, though she denied it vehemently. She learned that he'd grown up poor in Missouri, that his father had drunk himself to death when Ethan was 12, that he'd learned ranching by working for other men until he'd saved enough to buy this land, that he'd never expected to love anyone as much as he'd loved Rebecca, but now understood that hearts could expand to hold multiple loves without diminishing any of them, that he was terrified of failing his children, but more terrified of not trying. They didn't kiss, didn't even hold hands beyond brief practical touches, but something grew between them nonetheless. Respect that deepened into affection, affection that hinted at something more profound. Ethan found himself watching for her smiles, listening for her footsteps, feeling content in her presence in ways that went beyond gratitude or convenience. 2 months after Clara's arrival, Reverend Walsh came to visit, ostensibly to check on the children's spiritual education, but really to gauge the nature of Ethan and Clara's relationship. The whole county was talking, apparently, some approving, some scandalized, all intensely interested in whether the widower and the spinster schoolteacher would make a match of it. People are going to talk no matter what you do, the Reverend said, accepting coffee and settling into a chair with the ease of a man comfortable in any setting. He was 60, white-haired, and possessed a practical wisdom that came from decades of ministering to frontier families. The question is whether you care what they say. I care about Clara's reputation, Ethan said. Don't want her suffering gossip because of me. Too late for that. The moment she declined the school position to live on your ranch, the gossip started. But surprisingly, most of it's favorable. People see a practical arrangement. You need help, she needs a position, the children need education. Makes sense to frontier thinking. Clara emerged from the schoolroom where she'd been giving lessons, wiping chalk dust from her hands. Reverend Walsh, good to see you. I hope Ethan's feeding you properly. He is, though I suspect your cooking is better than his. The Reverend's eyes twinkled. I wanted to talk to you both, actually, about making things official. Ethan felt his pulse quicken. Official how? Marriage, obviously. You've been courting for 2 months now, as the whole county knows. People are starting to wonder when you'll make it proper. The Reverend held up a hand before either could protest. I'm not saying you have to. I'm saying it's worth considering. For the children's sake, if nothing else. We're not ready for marriage, Clara said firmly. We barely know each other. You've been living under the same roof for 2 months, raising 4 children together, building a school, sharing meals and responsibilities in daily life. If that's not knowing someone, I don't know what is. The Reverend's voice gentled. I'm not trying to rush you, but the frontier is practical, and you're both practical people. Sometimes waiting for perfect certainty means missing good opportunities. We've discussed this, Ethan said carefully. We're taking things slow, seeing if this works before making permanent decisions. And how's it working so far? Ethan glanced at Clara, saw his own uncertainty reflected in her eyes. How was it working? Better than he'd dared hope, easier than he'd expected, more natural than felt possible after only 2 months. But was that enough foundation for marriage? It's working well, Clara answered when Ethan remained silent. Better than I expected. But Reverend, surely you understand that building a life together requires more than just compatibility and convenience. It requires love? The Reverend smiled. My dear, I've married over 100 couples in my 30 years of ministry. Some were wildly in love, some were practical matches, some were arranged by families. You know what I've learned? The marriages that last aren't the ones that started with the most passion. They're the ones where both people showed up every day and chose each other. You and Ethan are already doing that. The love will follow if you let it. His words hung in the air, profound in their simplicity. Ethan thought about the past 2 months. The 1,000 small moments of choosing each other, of showing up, of trying. Was that not a kind of love already? Different from what he'd felt for Rebecca, but no less real? I need time, Clara said quietly. I'm not saying no. I'm saying not yet. We agreed to see this through winter, to give ourselves time to be certain. It's only October. Fair enough. The Reverend didn't push, which Ethan appreciated. I just wanted to plant the seed, let you know the option exists whenever you're ready, and to tell you that regardless of what you decide, you have the community's support. People see good things happening here. Children thriving, a ranch recovering, 2 lonely people finding companionship. That matters. After the Reverend left, Clara and Ethan stood on the porch in a silence that felt heavy with unspoken thoughts. Finally, Clara spoke. He's not wrong, you know, about how well things are working. I know. And I can see how people might think we should marry. It would make sense. It would. Ethan turned to face her. But sense isn't enough. Not for something as important as marriage. You were right from the beginning. We shouldn't commit to something permanent just because it's convenient. Even if it's more than convenient now. Claire's voice was barely above a whisper. Even if I wake up every morning glad I'm here? Even if the thought of leaving makes my chest tight? Even if I've started to wonder what it would be like to really be part of this family instead of just helping from the outside? Ethan's heart hammered. What are you saying? I'm saying... She stopped, gathering courage. I'm saying I think I might be falling in love with you. Not dramatic, sweeping, can't-breathe love like in novels, but quiet, steady, this feels right love. The kind that builds over shared coffee and children's laughter and evenings watching stars. And it terrifies me because I didn't expect it, didn't plan for it, Didn't think I was ready for it. He reached for her hands, holding them gently. I'm falling in love with you too. Have been for weeks, probably. Kept trying to tell myself it was too soon, too fast, that I was betraying Rebecca's memory. But Rebecca wouldn't want me frozen in grief forever. She'd want me to live, to love again, to give our children a complete family. So what do? We keep doing what we've been doing, taking it day by day, letting things develop naturally. And when we're both ready, when we're sure this is real and lasting, we'll make it official. He squeezed her hands. But, Clara, I need you to know, whether we marry in a month or a year or never, you're already part of this family. The children love you. I love what you've done for us, who you are, who we're becoming together. That's not going to change regardless of legal status. Tears glistened in her eyes. Promise me something? Anything. Promise me you'll never ask me to marry you out of obligation or convenience. When you propose, if you propose, it needs to be because you truly want me as your wife, your partner, your equal. Not because the county expects it or because it makes practical sense. I need to know it's real. I promise. When I ask you to marry me, it will be because I can't imagine my life without you in it. Because I choose you not just for what you do, but for who you are. Because the thought of forever with you feels like hope instead of compromise. She smiled through her tears. That's a high bar to set. You're worth a high bar. They stood there on the porch as November wind swept across the prairie, carrying the promise of winter. Inside, the children laughed over some game Clara had taught them. The schoolroom held the dreams of frontier families who wanted better for their children. The ranch showed signs of renewed purpose and care. And two people who'd been broken in different ways stood together, not yet whole, but healing, building something real from the fragments of their old lives. Winter came early that year, sweeping down from the mountains with howling winds and blinding snow. The school continued when weather permitted, the handful of students bundling up against the cold, their parents grateful for the education Clara provided. On bad days, when the wind turned vicious and the snow piled high, Clara taught only Ethan's children, turning lessons into games that kept everyone warm and entertained. The enforced togetherness of winter revealed truths that easier seasons might have hidden. Clara was not always patient. She had a temper when pushed, a sharp tongue when tired, and a stubborn streak that rivaled Ethan's own. Ethan discovered that he was still capable of unreasonable jealousy when other fathers lingered too long chatting with Clara after school. They argued about discipline techniques, about how much wood to burn versus saving for later, about whether Benjamin was old enough for solid food. But they also learned to apologize, to compromise, to choose kindness over being right. They learned each other's patterns, how Clara needed quiet in the morning, how Ethan brooded when overwhelmed, how they could diffuse tension with humor or soften conflict with honesty. They learned to be partners in the truest sense, sharing not just responsibilities, but also dreams and fears and the thousand small decisions that comprise daily life. By Christmas, the question wasn't whether they would marry, but when. The children asked constantly, confused about why Miss Clara wasn't their mama yet, if everyone acted like she was. The community had long since accepted them as a couple, including Clara in invitations as Mrs. Callahan, even though she corrected them every time. Even Clara herself seemed to have moved past her fears, settling into their life with a contentment that spoke of true belonging. On Christmas Eve, after the children were asleep and the cabin glowed with firelight, Ethan pulled out the ring he'd been carrying for weeks. It had been Rebecca's originally, a simple gold band with a tiny chip of diamond. Nothing fancy, but everything precious. He'd waited for the right moment, for some sign that the universe approved, for certainty to replace doubt. "Clara," he said, his voice steadier than he'd expected. "Come sit with me." She settled beside him on the bench he'd built, her shoulder warm against his. "What's wrong? You look serious." "Nothing's wrong. Everything's right, actually. That's what I want to talk about." He pulled out the ring, holding it where firelight made it gleam. This was Rebecca's. She left it to our daughters, but I hope, she'd approve of what I'm about to do. Claire's breath caught. "Ethan, let me say this first, please." He turned to face her fully. "I love you. Not because you saved my life, or because you're good with the children, or because you make everything easier, though those things are all true. I love you because you're brave and honest and ridiculously stubborn, because you laugh at terrible jokes and cry over sad books, because you see the best in people even when they don't deserve it, because you walked into my disaster with a loaf of bread and decided we were worth saving. His voice cracked. Because you make me want to be better than I am. Because the thought of spending my life with you feels like coming home. Tears streamed down Clara's face, but she was smiling. Yes. I haven't asked yet. Yes, anyway. He laughed, the sound shaky with emotion. Clara Monroe, will you marry me? Will you be my wife, partner to my days and mother to my children? Will you build a life with me here on this ranch, teaching and learning and growing old together? Will you take this ring and this man and this chaotic, beautiful, impossible family and make them yours? Yes, she whispered, then louder. Yes, yes to all of it. Yes to you. He slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if Rebecca had left her blessing in its sizing, and pulled Clara into his arms. She came willingly, her tears soaking his shirt, her arms tight around him. They held each other while the fire burned low and the snow fell outside, two people who'd been lost finding themselves in each other. I love you, Clara said against his chest. I fought it for so long, but I love you. You and those chaotic children and this drafty cabin and the impossible dream of building something lasting here. I love you too. More than I thought I could love anyone after Rebecca. She'd like you, I think. She'd approve. I hope so. I hope she knows I'm not trying to replace her. I could never... You're not replacing her. You're giving us a future. There's a difference. He pulled back to look at her face, tear-stained and beautiful in the firelight. When do you want to marry? Reverend Walsh will come whenever we ask. Spring, Clara said without hesitation. After winter breaks. I want the prairie in bloom, the children able to play outside, neighbors able to attend without risking their lives in blizzards. I want it to be a celebration, not just a practical necessity. Spring then. We'll marry when the world wakes up. They sat together planning their future until the fire burned to embers and cold crept in. They talked about expanding the cabin to give the children more room, about growing the school, about maybe having a child of their own someday if Clara was willing. They made plans and dreamed dreams and built their future word by careful word. When they finally banked the fire and prepared for bed, Clara stopped at the door to her small room. Ethan, thank you. For what? For waiting, for not rushing, for letting me find my way to this instead of pushing, for making it real instead of convenient. She smiled, for loving me enough to make sure I was certain. Always. He kissed her forehead, chaste and sweet. Sleep well, my almost wife. Sleep well, my almost husband. Spring came as it always did in Wyoming, suddenly, violently, transforming winter's brown to green almost overnight. The wedding took place on a Sunday in April, on the porch of the cabin with the prairie blooming behind them and neighbors gathered from 20 miles in every direction. Clara wore a dress Mrs. Henderson had helped her sew, simple but beautiful. Ethan wore his best shirt, his hand steady as he took hers. The children stood beside them, Matthew and Michael in matching vests looking impossibly grown up, Sarah in a new dress clutching flowers, Benjamin in Clara's arms babbling happily. They were part of the ceremony too, Reverend Walsh amending his usual words to acknowledge that this marriage created not just a union of two people, but the official formation of a family. Do you, Ethan Callahan, take Clara Monroe to be your lawfully wedded wife? To love and honor, in sickness and health, for richer or poorer, until death parts you? I do. His voice rang clear across the prairie. And do you, Clara Monroe, take Ethan Callahan to be your lawfully wedded husband? To love and honor, in sickness and health, for richer or poorer, until death parts you? And do you promise to be mother to his children, to raise them with love and wisdom? I do. Clara's voice was steady, certain, joyful. Then by the power vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife. Ethan, you may kiss your bride. The kiss was brief, appropriate for public viewing, but full of promise. When they broke apart, the gathered crowd erupted in cheers. The children tackled them both in hugs. Neighbors pressed forward with congratulations, and someone produced a fiddle and started playing. The celebration lasted until evening, full of food and dancing and the kind of joy that frontier communities saved for rare moments of happiness. As the sun set and neighbors began the journey home, Ethan and Clara stood together watching the prairie turn gold in the dying light. The children played nearby, worn out but happy, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. "Any regrets?" Ethan asked quietly. Clara turned to him, her new husband, her choice, her future. "Not a single one. This is exactly where I'm supposed to be. Even though it's hard sometimes, even though winter's coming again and the school's growing and the children are exhausting, especially because of all that. Hard doesn't mean wrong, Ethan. It just means worth fighting for." She took his hand, the ring on her finger catching the last light. "A year ago, I was alone in Boston, convinced I'd never have this. A family, a home, a purpose beyond just surviving. And then I walked onto your porch with a loaf of bread and found everything I'd been afraid to hope for. Best loaf of bread ever baked." She laughed. "You haven't even tasted it. You were dying when I arrived, remember? Still counts. That bread saved my life just by bringing you here." They stood together as stars emerged overhead, the same stars that had witnessed Ethan's despair and Clara's arrival and every moment between. The cabin behind them glowed with lamplight. The school stood ready for tomorrow's lessons. The ranch spread around them, no longer failing but thriving. And 4 children who'd been in danger of becoming orphans played in the yard, secure in the knowledge that they were loved and safe and home. "Tell them the story," Sarah called, running over. "Tell us again about the snake and the bread and how you saved Papa." "Again? Haven't you heard it enough times?" But Clara was smiling as she scooped up her youngest daughter, settling onto the porch with the children gathering around. "Never enough," Matthew said seriously. "It's our family story." So Clara told it again, the story of how a rattlesnake bite and a loaf of bread had brought them all together. She told it with humor and drama, making the children gasp at the scary parts and laugh at the funny moments. And Ethan watched his family, his wife, his children, his life, and knew with absolute certainty that sometimes the universe did give second chances to people brave enough to take them. That was the day their family truly began. Not with the snakebite or the arrival or even the wedding, but with this moment, all of them together, choosing each other, building something real and lasting from love and hope, and one woman's willingness to walk into a stranger's disaster, carrying nothing but bread and mercy.